Chapter 101. Conquering the Great Milk Tank. A crisp "Mimi" drifted through the air as the Great Milk Tank spoke. Ethan frowned, puzzled. He shook his head. I haven't even started playing yet. How would I know who's won or lost? In that instant, the simpleton beast's eyes flared with electric blue light. It unleashed a surge of electrocardiogram waves, forging a direct mental link to the tank's consciousness. Without a word exchanged aloud, the two elves slipped into silent communion. Ethan stood by in complete stillness. He trusted the beast wouldn't waste its effort on anything useless. Moments later, the telepathic bridge quietly dissolved. Still, the effect was unmistakable. Although Ethan couldn't discern their thoughts, he saw the transformation in the Great Milk Tank's expression. All her suspicion and hostility had melted away, replaced by a serene calm as she regarded him. The simpleton beast bowed its head toward Ethan and spoke in a soft mental voice. Master, her experiences mirror mine. She, like me, was separated from her people when she was still a child. I hope you can help her find her herd. Only then will she truly heed your commands. The simple creature's words echoed in Ethan's mind, each pulse of his cardiac link stronger and more precise than before. In truth, its conversations with Milk Tank had gone far beyond mere orders. The creature had shared its most intimate memories, times when it had faced overwhelming odds, and how Ethan had made it feel understood. Those shared experiences broke down Milk Tank's resistance, convincing her that if this creature could submit to a human and win his trust, then forging an alliance with him was worth trying. Ethan hesitated. He knew how easily hope could be dashed in their world, yet the creature's confidence was unmistakable. Milk Tank had already agreed to cooperate. A faint, knowing smile lifted Tong Chingmu's lips as he stepped forward and, with composed determination, entered the vast milk reservoir. I reached out and gently placed my hand on her head. Her eyes widened in surprise, almost awkwardly. Please guide me from now on, Big Milk Tank, I said with a smile. I hadn't expected recruiting the Big Milk Tank to go so smoothly. I'd braced myself for a fight, convinced I'd have to offer some tempting favor to win her over. Mimi? She murmured, tensing as my hand approached. Yet the moment my palm came to rest on her head, she relaxed, leaning into me as if she'd been waiting for that simple touch. I felt warmth ripple through her small hand and sensed the trust in that soft pressure. It was the first time I'd known anything like this since I left my tribe. Alone in the wild, hunting, foraging, finding shelter, I had always depended on no one. That unending solitude made me guarded, and my own dislike of violence only increased the cruelty of survival. The only skills I'd mastered were the healing arts taught by the kind creatures of the forest, support abilities to mend my wounds. But now, with her by my side, something inside me shifted. For the first time since I'd struck out on my own, I felt I wasn't alone anymore. Chapter Tech, she offered little resistance when the hunter captured her. Of all the elves crammed into that vast milk tank, she was by far the calmest. To her, humans were merely another branch of her own kind, and she had long since grown used to defeat. Then came the so-called dumb beast, an elf who'd suffered nearly the same fate, who adopted an unusual approach to show her just how different humans and elves truly were, and how tightly each race was bound by invisible chains. In that single moment, a spark of curiosity ignited within her. What exactly did it mean to be human? The captive, somberly nicknamed the Big Milk Tank, turned her gaze toward Ethan. He smiled, gently stroking her hair, then produced from his ring a mid-level energy cube, carefully prepared for her. Big Milk Tank, he asked softly, would you like to try this? At the first whiff, her nostrils flared. The scent was unlike anything she'd known. Rich, alluring, almost irresistible. She hesitated for only a heartbeat, then met Ethan's encouraging eyes. Without a word, his look said it all. Taste it, and see for yourself. An unexpected thrill ran through her. Yes, she wanted to know. She sank her teeth into the cube, and at once an unfamiliar sweetness bloomed on her tongue, layered with depth and warmth that felt both strange and wondrous. As the flavor spread, the world around her, once dull and predictable, seemed to shimmer with new possibilities. At the precise moment the rim of the energy cube splintered, Milk Tank's eyes snapped open. What had begun as tentative nibbling instantly turned into a furious, decisive chew. Then, with one last gulp, the cube vanished inside it. Under Ethan's watchful gaze and that of his companion beast, a shy blush spread across Milktank's pudgy cheeks. Seeing this stoic, stubborn elf finally accept the cube, Ethan allowed himself a quiet nod of satisfaction, but he didn't relax his expression. Stepping forward, he addressed Milktank with calm authority. "Milktank," he began, "I'll help you find your clan, just as I promised. But from the moment you join me as my elf, you must follow my orders. If you refuse a command and endanger the battle, I won't be so forgiving." Ethan paused, meeting the oversized creature's dark eyes. "I know fighting isn't your favorite thing. I'll cut back on your battles. Really, I will. But I won't let you skip training altogether. All I ask is that you give it your best and look out for your teammates." Milktank's perpetually cheerful grin flickered, then vanished. The elf stood still, its cheeks losing their rosy hue, and stared back at Ethan with a sudden, newfound seriousness. In that silent exchange, both trainer and elf understood the gravity of the promise they'd just made. Ethan paused for a moment, then nodded firmly. "Mimi, let's go." He knew better than to underestimate the buxom elf's talents. Even if he planned to use her mainly as support, her healing abilities could prove life-saving. "We'll grab some lunch first," he added, giving her a reassuring pat on the head. "Then we can meet the rest of our new recruits." Mimi blinked, gave an approving hum, and together they made their way back to the central chamber of the elven encampment. Inside, Dark Crow and Ghost stepped forward eagerly to greet the newcomers. Ghost looked especially thrilled. Ever since he'd joined the team as the youngest member, he'd longed for another face to share the little brother spotlight. True to form, Ghost dashed around Mimi in an excited circle, chanting his joy so loudly that the normally composed elf began to blush. Sensing her embarrassment, Dark Crow, the oldest and most dependable of the group, swooped in behind her. With a gentle tap of his wing on her shoulder, he let her know everything was under control. With the introductions about to begin, Ethan smiled to himself. It seemed their makeshift family was growing once again. Chapter 5. The Milk Tank. When Ethan realized that the Milk Tank was the only woman on the squad, he couldn't help smiling. No sooner had the elves caught sight of her than they threw themselves into their drills with renewed determination. Rumor had it that no elf in his right mind would dare harm her now, unless, of course, they wanted to face Ethan's wrath. The young woman, cheeks flushed, found herself the center of attention for the first time, yet she handled it with effortless grace. After all, she carried a secret far more valuable than any blade: her milk, famed across the land for its rich flavor and astonishing restorative powers. Every tavern and apothecary charged a fortune for just a single jar of her milk, but within the barracks she ladled it out freely. One by one, the spirits who tasted it felt their wariness vanishing. The soreness in their muscles eased, and an unexpected surge of vitality filled their veins. What had been an exhausting morning of training suddenly felt invigorating, and all thanks to her miraculous gift. Ethan watched the scene unfold with a growing admiration. These past few days had tested them all, but witnessing her quiet strength and the way she rallied everyone around her reminded him why they fought together in the first place. Author's note: I've been a bit drained creatively lately, so please forgive any rough spots. If you enjoyed this chapter, I'd be thrilled if you bookmarked, recommended it, or left a comment. Your support keeps the story flowing. Chapter 102, Superpower. After a cheerful lunch, the team settled back into their afternoon routine. Though the newcomer, nicknamed Milk Tank for her sturdy build, was still a little quiet, she was already fitting in. The dark crows hovered protectively around her, and even the ghostly spirits made a special effort to include her in their banter, all hoping to lift her spirits. In the training hall that afternoon, Ethan stayed behind in his workshop crafting energy cubes, focusing intently on perfecting their core matrix. Meanwhile, the elves resumed their indoor drills, repeating the same footwork and posture exercises they'd mastered that morning. The dark crow had bulked up to 20 pounds of extra muscle. His heavier frame slowed him only slightly. His raw strength and agility remained formidable. Guys, the so-called foolish beast, spent his time indoors as well. His telekinetic power had come so far that every loose object in the room obeyed his will. To refine his precision, He lifted each piece of furniture and set it back down exactly where it belonged, over and over again. The cramped space prevented him from sparring with other fighters, so today his training was purely physical. He vaulted over tables, vaulted under beams, and left footprints in every corner of the floor. At Ethan's suggestion, the milk tank joined them for a lighter version of Guy's regimen. Though she moved awkwardly at first, she was determined, wiping sweat from her brow and matching each maneuver as best she could. Later, Ethan assigned her a series of simple support tasks: hauling water canisters, arranging training dummies, and preparing fresh energy cubes so she could build confidence at her own pace. By day's end, the team's bonds had grown a little stronger. Ethan admired how quickly everyone adapted to new challenges, and how even the quietest recruit was finding her place among fighters and spirits alike. Ethan started the day with some light indoor calisthenics, gentle stretches and mobility drills to loosen the stiffness he'd accumulated during his months of confinement. Once he felt limber again, he shifted to producing the nutrient-dense milk his elf companions needed to recover their strength. When the batch was ready, he tucked it away in his spatial ring. The workout had been grueling, but seeing the elves around him push themselves gave Ethan a surge of motivation. Next, he turned to the energy blocks that had condensed on the training platform during his previous session. So far, every raw material he'd invested had yielded high-grade blocks, enough to feed the elves for over a month. At their current consumption rate, they would use more than 1,000,000 Union coins worth of supplies in that time. And with the elven population steadily growing, the demand and the potential profit would only rise. With all the energy blocks safely stowed, Ethan finally had a moment to open the superpower training manual that Nazi had left him. He'd glanced at the introduction before, a concise overview of how to awaken and wield superhuman abilities. Based on his current level, Ethan could barely lift a stone the size of his thumb, and only for a few seconds. Hardly impressive, but the manual promised methods to cultivate and expand his strength. Determined, Ethan settled in to study every word. Ethan picked up the thin booklet with mild curiosity. Maybe this will have something useful, he thought. Yet as soon as he cracked it open, he was utterly captivated. Page by page, a whole new world unfolded before his eyes. 2 hours later, he finally leaned back and exhaled. Just a dozen pages long, this little handbook had completely consumed his attention. It laid out the power hierarchy shared by superhumans, Jobin power wielders, and bird warriors, each ascending from junior to intermediate, then advanced, and finally to the apex of their field. Although the text didn't delve into Changpan power or the full bird warrior ranks, it treated superhuman abilities in considerable detail. Central to the superhuman classification was a tool called the Neon meditation beads, a simple yet reliable gauge of strength that even elves used. According to the booklet, a junior superhuman can heft 100 meditation beads, an intermediate superhuman can lift 1,000 beads, an advanced superhuman can manage 10,000 beads, and only those who master far greater weights ascend to the true pinnacle of superhuman power. Ethan flipped the last page, his mind racing. In just a few lines about beads and lifting, he'd uncovered the key to measuring, and perhaps one day increasing his own burgeoning abilities. He closed the booklet with renewed determination, eager to put its lessons into practice. Ethan flipped to the chapter on how supreme superpowers were supposed to be ranked, and found nothing. It seemed the author either hadn't defined what top tier truly meant, or was simply speculating. I still don't know what level Nazi is at, or whether he's even broken through the ultimate barrier, Ethan muttered. If Nazi's talent couldn't qualify him as a top-tier superpowered individual, then there must be only a handful of people in the world capable of reaching that level. A later section on talent classifications caught his eye. Much like the rigid bloodlines of elves, each kind of superpower depended on its wielder's innate aptitude, and that aptitude largely determined how far one could go. The absolute minimum requirement to awaken even a basic superpower was 5 times the mental capacity of an average person. According to the Beast Tutor's explanation, Ethan's mind already cleared that threshold. Without Nazi's catalytic spark, however, he doubted he'd ever awakened on his own. Having 5 times the normal mental strength, it turned out, was barely the starting line. Ethan stared at the booklet in disbelief. It claimed that, with enough dedication to cultivation and a fair share of good fortune, he could reach junior superpower status in 30 years. 30 years? At that pace, he'd be lucky to live long enough to see it. Flipping through the pages, he noted a warning. Some fundamental superpower techniques, like electrocardiograph induction, prized in actual combat, were off limits until one attained at least the junior rank. By the booklet's own reckoning, Ethan stood no chance of learning such skills in his lifetime. He read on. Awakening a power 10 times greater than that of an ordinary person qualified one as a normal superpowered individual, a level the booklet said could be achieved in about 5 years. If your awakening reached 20 times the average, you merely gained the possibility of becoming an intermediate superpower, no guarantees. And to secure that intermediate rank outright, your power would have to be 50 times that of a normal human. Ethan closed the booklet, mind racing. 50 times? 20? He wasn't even sure how far he'd awakened so far, but 30 years, he thought. 30 years was a lifetime. Ethan flipped through the slim booklet Nazi had left him. The first few pages were titled Talent Classification and claimed to be a reliable system for gauging one's innate potential, even the faintest spark of a superpower. It went on to outline the thresholds of advanced abilities, but then abruptly ended, promising that future divisions would be explained elsewhere. Beyond that, the majority of the booklet was devoted to the basic principles and introductory techniques for awakening and honing psychic gifts. Scattered throughout were a handful of passages that Nazi himself had highlighted. They described simple exercises, like moving pebbles with one's thoughts, and offered a rudimentary path to strengthening the mind. That was precisely why Nazi had entrusted the manual to Ethan. For days, Ethan had followed the instructions to the letter. Room sealed, lights dimmed, body perfectly still. He sat in meditation for 2 hours at a stretch, but no matter how deep he pressed his concentration, he never reached the altered state the text promised. Frustration gnawed at him, yet he refused to give up. Leaning back, Ethan closed his eyes and spoke softly to the neural chip implanted near his heart. Scan and digitize the entire booklet. Cross-reference it with our database. See if you can find any advanced methods to accelerate mental strength or unlock superpowers. A moment later, the chip's cool mechanical voice replied, Database initialized. Searching archives. Estimated query time, 3 days. Ethan exhaled, steeling himself for the wait. If there was a faster way to break through his mental barrier, he was determined to find it, even if it took every second of those 72 hours. Remaining time, 2 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, 30 seconds. Ethan stared at the blinking countdown. In less than 3 days, he'd qualify to ascend to junior superpower. Determined not to waste a single second, he hesitated only briefly before speaking. System, initiate new mission, install the chipset, and develop a temporal calculation algorithm so I can become a junior superpower immediately. A calm, synthetic voice replied, Mission confirmed. Achieve junior superpower status. Estimated completion time, 31 years. Time remaining, 31 years. Ethan blinked in disbelief. 31 years. He let out a long, exasperated sigh. Author's note, I've been loving the new novel Blue and White by Dungeon Players. If you're into thrilling adventures, give it a try. Today's date is 5/20. If you enjoyed this chapter, please bookmark and recommend. Your support means the world. Chapter 103, Training and Night Watch. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. 31 years old, and I'm stuck at the awakening stage, he muttered, voice low and bitter. They dangle the promise of power, only to drench it with a bucket of cold water. He shot a glance at the glowing datapad in front of him. It was clear that no ordinary cultivation technique in this manual would boost his superpower. He'd need something foreign, some alien artifact. Hopefully the chip's database would yield a clue. The afternoon slipped away as the elves continued their rigorous drills. Ever since leaving the trial island, they'd had no real battles to channel their energy, so they poured every ounce of strength into training instead. Today was Ethan's last full day in Golden City. By tomorrow morning, they'd set out for Manjin in Chengdu. After an early dinner, Ethan rounded up the elves for a full-body massage. his way of loosening their muscles and easing their fatigue. Under his skilled touch, every elf but Guis promptly drifted off to sleep. He paused to watch them slumber peacefully, took a steadying breath, and whispered good night to Guis before heading off to his own quarters. When darkness fell, the ghost stirred. By day it lay dormant in Ethan's shadow, conserving its strength, but at night it became the team's most vigilant sentry. As Ethan settled into bed, he knew he could sleep soundly. His spectral guardian would keep watch until dawn. Early the next morning, Ethan and his elven companions finished breakfast in a hurry and made their way to Golden City's downtown station. Here the maglev trains ran in frequent loops, linking Kanto to the Western Territories with unrivaled speed. Flashing his Union ID card, Ethan spent 5,000 Union coins on a first-class compartment. Each carriage was divided into private two-seat suites, complete with plush, fully reclining chairs. Now that he could afford it, Ethan didn't mind a little luxury, especially if it meant his two loyal spirits, the lumbering rock-like golem and the gentle, milk-laden bovine, could stretch their limbs outside their elf balls. Only the dark crow remained confined, hidden away to prevent any hint of its true identity as he traveled under Alliance credentials. No sooner had Ethan settled into his seat and released his companions than the train's intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will depart shortly. Please secure your belongings and prepare for departure." The platform doors slid shut, and in an instant, the maglev surged forward, its silent power propelling them toward their next adventure. Ethan froze as the announcement crackled over the speakers. "Next passenger for this compartment, please board." Before he could gather his thoughts, thud! The sliding door burst open, rattling against the wall. A flash of bright pink hair, tied into two high ponytails, appeared in the gap. The girl peered in, cheeks flushed, and stuck out her tongue apologetically. "I'm so sorry. I almost missed the car. I got a little too excited," she panted, stepping inside. Ethan waved it off with a calm nod. The newcomer, no more than 15 or 16 and about his height, hurried in. Her twin ponytails bounced with each step. She wore a plain white t-shirt and denim shorts, every bit the picture of youthful energy. Behind Ethan, the massive, lumbering creature and its oversized milk can stirred at the movement, gave the girl a lazy once-over, then settled back down with a snore, clearly unconcerned. Outside the window, the maglev raced on, setting out from Golden City in the Kanto region, slicing past Bayan Mountain and charging toward Manjin City in Chengdu. Ethan settled into his seat and leaned back against the window. The train was fast, but the trip still stretched out for another 5 hours. No sooner had he sat down than he noticed the girl across the aisle shift uncomfortably, pressing her hand against the seat cushion. Her eyes fell on the two pink Pokémon, resting quietly in their Pokeballs, sitting beside him. Before Ethan could re-CT, she hopped up and trotted over. She approached the pair of Pokeballs as if they were curiosities in a museum. Ethan frowned. It was one thing to be curious, but another entirely to stare at someone else's Pokémon without permission. He didn't doubt her intentions were innocent, but the impoliteness of her behavior left him uneasy. After a few moments of intense scrutiny, the girl seemed to realize how forward she'd been. Her cheeks went pink. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she stammered, stepping back. "I didn't mean to. I just—" She paused, clearly at a loss for words, then slapped her left palm with her right fist as though rallying her courage. From her belt she drew a Pokeball of her own. With a quick press of the central button, it shrank in her hand to the familiar red and white sphere. Ethan relaxed slightly, offering a small nod in acknowledgement. "It's okay," he said, his tone softening. "I'd introduce them properly if you like." Her face brightened. "I'd like that," she replied, settling beside him again. And so, in the gentle hum of the speeding train, two trainers began to share stories of their Pokémon and of the journey that lay ahead. Ethan's Miltank had been lying there half asleep when it suddenly snapped to attention, its muscles tensing in the classic attack-ready stance. Sensing its anxiety, Ethan reached out and gently patted its head, signaling that everything was under control. He shifted his gaze to the girl before him, curiosity stirring in his chest. "Go on, Miltank," she called, tossing an elven ball into the air. A scarlet beam of light shot forth, and in an instant, a robust pink Miltank appeared on the training room floor. Ethan's milk tank blinked wide-eyed at the newcomer. It had been so long since it had seen another of its own kind, only its second day with Ethan's team, and already this astonishing sight. The girl pressed her free hand to her cheek, cheeks tinged with pink. "I hope you don't mind," she said with an embarrassed smile. "I'm a milk tank trainer too. I couldn't resist raising one of these adorable pink elves." Her milk tank stretched, then let out a friendly, "Milk tank," a clear greeting to Ethan's companion. Ethan smiled back as his milk tank responded in kind, the two beasts acknowledging each other in quiet camaraderie. Chapter 520. Ethan slid the data chip into his handheld scanner and watched the screen light up with information. Pokémon, Big Milk. Can gender, female, level 23, type general, characteristic, thick fat, held item, none. Genetic moves, hold on, earth cast base moves, tackle, bark, roll, stamp, drink milk, patience TM moves, heal bell, roadblock, flame fist, frozen fist, lightning fist. Skill learner, burst fist, water awakening, hold, dream words, sleep. He frowned as he studied the numbers and move list. Kids from wealthy families always seem to have the best, well-bred, well-trained Pokémon, tuned to perfection. Just watching the farmhand land that triple punch during a skill transfer rubbed salt in the wound. By the looks of it, this Big Milk can's physique alone outmatched the partners Ethan had been relying on. Its muscles were clearly stronger, its stats superior. If it received the kind of rigorous training a rich kid could afford, rather than being spoiled into laziness, it might well outclass any ordinary battler he could send out. Ethan closed the scanner with a decisive click. He'd never been one to back down from a challenge. With hard work and strategy, he'd turned this new partner into a powerhouse. Author's note, Chapter 520 is now complete. I hope you enjoyed it. Lately, I've been focusing on slice-of-life moments and sharing fun daily details. Thanks for sticking with me. Chapter 104, Mangqian Xiaoqian. Ethan stood and offered his hand. "I'm Ethan," he said softly. The girl beamed at him as she clasped his hand in hers. "Oh, that's right. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Xiaoqian from Manjin City." She spoke with infectious enthusiasm. Ethan nodded but didn't elaborate on where he was from. Xiaoqian didn't seem to mind. Her smile only grew wider. "Hee hee, Ethan, did you capture your milk tank out in the wild?" Ethan nodded again, confirming her guess. In fact, he hadn't captured it himself. He'd purchased it from the Hunters Guild, but it was certainly possible to find milk tanks roaming free in the wild. Xiaoqian's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Want to know how I knew?" she prompted. Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure. Why?" "Because my family runs the largest milk tank farm in the region," Xiaoqian said proudly. She drew herself up and patted her still flat chest with a self-assured grin. "Almost every milk tank you see around here came from us, and since I've never met yours before, it had to be wild-born. I recognize every bred milk tank in Manjin City." Ethan couldn't help but smile at her confidence. It seemed he'd made quite an impression, one that Xiaoqian was determined to savor. Ethan stepped into the sunlit courtyard and couldn't help but pause in awe. There, beneath a graceful archway of white marble, stood Xiaoqian, only child and direct heir of the Daoguan family, the undisputed powerhouse of Manjin City. Her sharp eyes and easy smile had already won her a reputation as one of the realm's most remarkable young nobles. In truth, the Daoguans ruled the continent's dairy trade with an iron fist. Their prized herds of colossal lactus cows, known throughout the elven world as milk giants, were as legendary as the Joey family's Geely eggs or the Junsha clan's fabled Kati hounds. No one dared breed milk giants in the wild, and the Daoguans' exclusive stock supplied the finest dairy across every market. Their farms were the bedrock of their wealth, and that fortune had, in turn, made Manjin City the foremost metropolis of the Chengdu region, on par with Golden City in Kanto. Xiaoqian laughed as she gently patted the broad muzzle of one particularly massive milk giant. "Do you know," she teased Ethan, "that I can recognize each of our 10,000 cows by name and personality?" Ethan only managed to shake his head in stunned silence. Of course she could. She'd grown up among these beasts. It all made perfect sense then, why the milk giants were the Daoguan family's signature. Their pure, rich milk had built an empire, and their giant, gentle eyes had forged unbreakable bonds with their mistress. Watching Xiaoqian lean close to whisper to her favorite bull, Ethan caught a glimpse of her true strength. a heart as vast and generous as the herds she tended. Vibrant, quick-witted, and occasionally a little reckless, Xiaoqian seemed to carry the world's burdens on a carefree breeze. Beneath her bright laughter lay a compassion that won her loyalty from nobles and stable hands alike. And now, it was clear she counted Ethan among her admirers. Ethan sat stiffly in his seat as Xiaoqian chattered away beside him. From the moment they'd boarded the maglev, she hadn't stopped. He tried to listen politely, but his head began to throb. "Hey, Ethan, where did you even learn how to build such a huge mana pool?" she asked, eyes bright with genuine curiosity. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but she barreled on before he could speak. "And your mana pool's not growing nearly as fast as mine did. If you want, I could show you some exercises that really helped me level up." Her hand swept toward the little creature curled at Ethan's feet. "Oh, and your pet's adorable. What breed is it? May I pet it?" Her last request was barely out of her mouth when someone knocked at the door with 3 quick taps. "Lunch service," called a soft female voice. A flight attendant in the sleek, silver and blue uniform of the maglev silently glided inside. She wore a friendly smile and carried a service pad. "Excuse me, lunchtime. What would you two like?" Xiaoqian finally paused long enough for Ethan to take a breath. She turned to the attendant with practiced ease. "I'll have the steak set meal, please." And she glanced at Ethan as if for approval. "He'll have the same, thank you." The attendant nodded. "Very good. I'll be back shortly." As the door slid shut behind her, Ethan let out a slow exhale. Beside him, Xiaoqian beamed, obviously pleased with herself. Ethan simply offered a small smile in return, and silently vowed that he'd think of a polite way to get a word in edgewise before the next meal service. Ethan wasn't picky about food. As long as he ended up full, he was happy, so when Xiaoqian ordered her set meal, he asked for the steak set as well. The flight attendant jotted down their choices and smiled. "Very good. Your lunches will be out shortly," she said, then slipped out and quietly slid the cabin door closed. Xiaoqian fell silent again, her earlier daydreams broken, and Ethan let out a small sigh of relief. Leaning at the edge of his seat was the so-called dull beast. To any onlooker, it looked like the creature was fast asleep. In truth, it was deep in meditation, practicing that elven art of resting without ever truly sleeping. Ethan's goal was to help it master this ability anywhere, anytime, a long process, but one that was already yielding results. Even though his own newly awakened powers were still fragile, he could sense the faint pulse of super energy flowing through the beast. On the floor next to Xiaoqian's seat sat the plump, cow-like creature she affectionately called Milky. It lifted its round head and chirped happily at the ceiling. "Me, me, me," it trilled, as if holding a private conversation with the clouds above. Xiaoqian's milk tank, the bulky, tank-like beast at her side, occasionally reached over to give Ethan's milk tank a reassuring pat. It was their way of showing sympathy and encouragement, though neither rider mentioned how Xiaoqian had ended up in Ethan's custody after that elven hunter incident. In the end, a 5,000 yuan ticket on this train, with its impeccable service, still felt like a good deal. Not long after, the lunchboxes Ethan and Xiaoqian had ordered arrived, the aroma of freshly cooked fare drifting tantalizingly through the carriage. But Ethan didn't dig in right away. Instead, he reached into his dimensional ring and produced 2 elegant elf-crafted bowls. From each of his 2 bonded beasts, the dim-witted beast and the milk tank, he poured a handful of energy cubes into the bowls. After several hours of silent training, he was more than ready for a snack. Spotting the familiar energy cubes floating just above the bowl's surface, Ethan lifted one into his mouth and chewed slowly, savoring the comforting taste. Meanwhile, Xiaoqian's milk tank set aside its comlink, lumbered over, and fixed its round, hopeful gaze on Ethan's bowl. When it recognized the same shimmering cubes it loved to munch on, it let out an enthusiastic grunt, clearly overjoyed to share in the feast. I watched as the dull-witted beast and the 2 massive milk tanks tore into their energy cubes with relish. Xiaoqian's milk tank, bigger and burlier than any I'd seen, hadn't managed a single bite, but the sweet scent drifting from the cubes had her utterly entranced. She kept her gaze fixed on the one Ethan's own milk tank was munching. Although the dull beast's cube gleamed like polished crystal, The simpler-looking cube in my milk tank's maw was clearly more tempting. Mimi? Ethan's milk tank rumbled softly, nudging her bowl across the floor toward Xiaohan's creature. It was an unspoken invitation to share, food, and perhaps a bit of camaraderie. After a quick sip of water, Xiaochan's milk tank met her trainer's gaze with expectant eyes. Xiaochan turned to me, curiosity lighting up her features. Ethan, where did you get these energy cubes? My milk tanks can't get enough of them. She barely glanced at the rare, high-grade cube the dull beast was savoring. As the Shufa, Millie Heiress, she'd sampled every premium nutrient on the market, yet she'd never encountered these mysterious new cubes. And the unassuming ones my milk tank relished so greedily? Those, above all, seemed to fascinate her. I'd already gotten Xiaochan's permission, and I'd even used her generous pour of milk in the recipe. It was clear she was enjoying it even more than Ethan, who doubled his own portion. When Qingmu heard Xiaochan's curious question, he paused for a moment, cheeks flushing, then grinned and confessed, I made it myself. So what do you think? If you liked it, please subscribe and share. Chapter 105, Ordered Energy Blocks. Xiaochan's eyes nearly popped out of her head. You made these yourself? She blurted, then hastily clasped her hands over her mouth. She edged closer to Ethan, her voice dropping to an awed whisper. You really crafted these energy blocks on your own? Are you a senior breeder now? Ethan rubbed his forehead with a rueful smile. No, nothing that grand. I'm only a mid-level breeder, good enough to make the medium blocks for the big milk tank. The high-grade ones, I had to buy those. Oh, Xiaochan let out a long, impressed sigh, but the glow of respect in her eyes didn't fade. You're about my age, right? And you've already reached mid-level breeding. I'm not even qualified to inherit my family's Daoguan yet. Ethan shook his head. Don't sell yourself short. You'll get there soon enough. Xiaochan fell quiet, mulling that over. She knew mid-level breeders were rare. Most registered with the Alliance didn't achieve it until their mid-20s. Ethan, barely 15, had just blown that standard out of the water. Her earlier disappointment faded, replaced by admiration. Under the soft workshop lights, she realized she was standing in the presence of a prodigy, and from that moment on, she resolved to learn everything she could from him. Xiaoqian didn't doubt Ethan for a moment. Manufacturing advanced energy cubes was notoriously complex, and at his age, he scarcely looked like the kind of breeder who could pull it off. Ethan remained silent, offering no reassurance, but honestly, she barely needed it. Almost immediately, her confidence bounced back. Yet for the first time in their conversation, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Ethan noticed the change and asked, "What's on your mind?" Xiaoqian hesitated, glancing over at her beloved beast, affectionately nicknamed the Big Milk Tank. Finally she spoke, voice tinged with nervousness. "Ethan, would you be willing to customize some mid-level energy cubes for her? I promise I'll pay whatever you ask." She'd held back the high-level cubes she'd originally prepared. Despite their stronger output and richer flavor, she suspected Ethan's mid-tier blocks would suit the Big Milk Tank far better. Ethan blinked for a moment at Xiaoqian's request, then quickly recovered with a smile. "No problem," he said. "Just tell me how many you need. I may not have that many in stock right away, so there might be a short wait." Xiaoqian's grin widened. "That's fine. I'm in no rush. Intermediate energy cubes usually go for 50 to 80 union coins each on the open market. But since you're a reliable supplier, I'm willing to pay 101 union coins for a custom batch of specialized units." Ethan's eyebrows shot up at the offer. He knew that ordinary high-level energy cubes sold for around 400 to 500 union coins, far pricier, since manufacturing them required more advanced materials and processes. Even so, doubling the typical rate for intermediate cubes was a generous deal. He wasn't one to turn down easy profit. "All right," he agreed, already calculating his production schedule. "I'll prepare 100 for you at that price. Give me a couple of days to stock up." Xiaoqian was rough around the edges, but she'd earned enough trust within the Alliance to keep a secret. She'd promised Ethan that, without his explicit permission, she wouldn't breathe a word about his ability to produce advanced energy cubes. Ethan himself had been careful, hinting at his talent without ever spelling it out. Any obvious claim of crafting high-level cubes would expose him immediately. After all, While intermediate breeders weren't unheard of in the Alliance, a 15-year-old capable of generating advanced energy blocks would spark a sensation even among the veterans. "How many do you need?" Ethan asked, lowering his voice. This was strictly confidential. Xiaoqian paused, furrowed her brow, and began counting on her fingers. "Let's see, 10 small reds, 12 whites, 8 pinks, and no, that won't cover it. 20 of the crimson batch, 5 of the pale orange one. Oh, and I'll need at least 15 of the moonsilver cubes." As her fingers kept tallying, the list grew longer and longer. Ethan's heart sank, and a cold sweat broke out along his hairline. Had she just requisitioned every major supply reserve on the farm? He clenched his jaw. There was no turning back now. Xiaoqian threw up her hands in exasperation. "I can't keep track of these numbers anymore. Let's just call it 100,000 units. Agreed?" Ethan's large eyes flickered as he regarded her coolly. 100,000 hearts, tens of millions of alliance credits. None of it made him blink. He stayed silent. "You're asking again?" he finally said, frowning. "Why 100,000? No, I mean, before that, could I at least buy some medium-grade energy cubes for the big canisters?" Xiaoqian backpedaled, her cheeks flushing. "Absolutely not," Ethan replied, brushing away a bead of imaginary sweat. He reached for the truth. Although fabricating intermediate energy blocks was a breeze with a top-of-the-line production rig and the latest microchip, cranking out 100,000 of them would devour every spare hour he had. And what he lacked most right now was time. Xiaoqian hesitated, then brightened. "All right, fair enough. 10,000 units, then. Let's start with that." Ethan nodded. At least that was something he could handle. She didn't think her request was unreasonable. Aside from the top-tier cubes, energy blocks were always bought in lots of 100,000 units. She'd grown so used to those massive orders that she never paused to consider how overwhelming 10,000 pieces might be for a single artisan. At 100 Alliance coins apiece, that order would cost 1 million Alliance coins, even though each intermediate energy block only cost around 10 Alliance coins in materials. It really was a gold mine. 10,000 is fine, Ethan said, but it'll take me a little while. I'm running low on components and will need to restock before I can start. To Ethan, constantly strapped for cash, the prospect of earning 1 million Alliance coins was almost too good to be true. "All right," Wu Xiaoqian replied with a smile. "When you arrive in Manjin City, you can stay at my place for a few days. I'll help you gather what you need, and you'll have time to explore the city while you're here. No rush at all." With that, she extended an open invitation. Ethan would have both a place to stay and a lucrative client for his energy blocks. Ethan paused for a moment, then gave a decisive nod. It wasn't just about earning gold. This assignment would also give him more time with his new, busty recruit. Who knew? Maybe he could help that shy side of hers soften a little too. Author's note: seasoned writers say you've got to be bold when asking for bookmarks and recommendation tickets. So here I go. If you enjoyed this chapter, please add it to your bookmarks and hit that recommend button. Your support means the world to me. Chapter 106, Arrival at Manjin. Ethan settled back in his seat on the maglev train just as Xiaoqian finished entering numbers into her banking app. With a few taps, she transferred 1 million Union coins into his account. The casual ease with which she handled such a large sum reminded Ethan once again that he was dealing with someone exceptionally wealthy. Yet despite her affluence, Xiaoqian carried none of the usual airs of a spoiled heiress. As the train rocketed southwest toward Chengdu, she chatted animatedly about her ventures in the dairy industry, specifically her work designing and scaling up those giant milk storage tanks. She spoke with infectious enthusiasm about different technical approaches, process optimizations, and even the latest equipment she was testing. For the uninitiated, these might have sounded like dry engineering details, but Ethan found himself drawn into her explanations. Between mouthfuls of his boxed lunch, he asked questions, nodded along, and let her guide the conversation. The 2 hours passed in surprisingly friendly harmony. By the time they'd polished off dessert and the train began to slow, Ethan realized he hadn't glanced out the window in ages. He had vaguely remembered looking forward to sweeping views of verdant groves as they descended from the Bayan Mountains. But in the end, He'd been too engrossed in Xiao Chan's stories to notice. A practiced voice crackled over the train speakers for the third time. Dear passengers, we have now arrived at Manjin Station, Chengdu. Please gather your belongings and disembark in an orderly fashion. Ethan stood and shook out his legs. He carried nothing but the pack slung over his shoulder. With a nod to Xiao Chan, who was already stowing her tablet, he stepped onto the platform, ready to set foot in the city at last. Ethan eased the trembling milk guardian into his fairy orb before stepping off the freight train. The creature was still skittish, barely accustomed to her new form, so he wanted her safely cocooned until she felt more secure. Beside him, Wu Xiaochan mirrored his actions, enclosing the beast in her own orb before hurrying down the platform. "Ethan, why don't you come to my place first?" she called as she caught up. "You don't have anywhere to stay in Manjin City yet. You could move into the Elf Center, and I'll have someone pick up all the supplies you need." Ethan offered a low grunt of assent. All right. He, too, hoped the Milk Guardian would one day meet others of her kind. It would help draw out her personality. And he'd heard that the wild elf territories near the livestock farms might be the best place to find Nitalang. They emerged into the afternoon sun, and Ethan raised his hand to hail a taxi. Before a cab could pull up, a sleek black limousine glided to a stop at the curb in front of them. Li Bo, the manor's steward, a kindly man in his late 50s dressed in a crisp black suit, stepped down from the co-pilot's seat and approached Xiao Qian with a respectful nod. "Miss Qian," he said gently, "it's best not to stay out too long. Your grandfather isn't feeling his best. Should we head back soon?" Xiao Qian rolled her eyes playfully and tousled her hair. "Oh, Li Bo, I just need some fresh air. This mansion makes me feel so cooped up." She turned on her heel, caught Ethan's arm, and ushered him forward. "By the way, Li Bo, meet my new friend. His name's Ethan." Li Bo's practiced courtesy flickered into a warm smile. "Pleased to meet you, Master Ethan." Ethan offered a polite nod but kept quiet, silently regretting that he'd let Xiao Qian talk him into this jaunt. "All right, no more dawdling. It's becoming rude," Xiao Qian announced, looping one arm through Li Bo's and giving his hand a playful squeeze. "Grandpa's waiting for us at home." Feigning reluctance, Li Bo fell into step beside them, though the fondness in his eyes gave him away. "Very well, Miss Qian." With Xiao Qian's laughter ringing out behind them, the three turned back toward the manor, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon sun. Our group boarded the luxurious extension car. Ethan leaned his head on one hand, staring at the passing cityscape, while Tianjin's calm voice filled his ears with background on Manjin City. As Chengdu's largest and most advanced metropolis, Manjin City holds the same prestige in these lands as Golden City does in the Kanto region, yet the two feel remarkably different. Golden City pulses with crowds and commercial energy. Manjin City, by contrast, wears a sleek, technological sheen. Its streets aren't packed and frenetic, but neither are they cold. People move with a warmer, almost leisurely air, content to linger over conversation or simply watch the world glide by. Religion shapes much of life in Chengdu, and the faith of the Phoenix King reigns supreme. Locals revere this mythical beast god, celebrating the legend that the Phoenix King once rescued 3 elves trapped in the ancient bell tower. According to the oldest tales, he then ascended as a triune deity, earning the title Earth's Emissary. This shared devotion to the Phoenix King has forged an unusually harmonious bond between humans and elves throughout the region. As the economic and technological heart of Chengdu, Manjin City is also defined by 4 iconic landmarks: the towering Manjin Broadcasting Tower, the Grand Manjin Department Store, the sprawling Manjin Game City, and the historic Manjin Road Museum. Each stands as a testament to the city's blend of innovation, culture, and tradition, qualities Ethan watched unfold with growing fascination outside the car window. The Manjindao Pavilion has long been under the stewardship of Xiao Qian's family. Although no single individual is officially listed as owner, everyone knows the clan holds ultimate authority, and soon it will be Xiao Qian herself who assumes full leadership. In the Elven Alliance, there are no formal statutes spelling out the process, but the custom is clear. When a pavilion's head wishes to name an heir, they choose from among their own kin and submit that choice to the Alliance for a quick review. So long as the nominee isn't hopelessly inept and there's no special vendetta against that particular pavilion, the alliance almost always ratifies the decision. In practice, the alliance's approval is little more than a formality, a reminder of its influence. Of course, not every pavilion in the alliance belongs to an old noble house. Some have sprung up thanks to capable commoners, rising swiftly through merit to become pillars of the community. In those cases, succession often falls to the pavilion's most devoted apprentices or is decided at a gathering of disciples at the Taoist hall. But for great family-run establishments like Manjindao, the future rests squarely on Xiaoqian's shoulders, and her choice of heir will shape the pavilion's destiny. Most civilians granted the right to establish a pavilion inevitably make it the center of their lives, building a tight-knit household around it. After all, no one wants their children to remain ordinary townsfolk. Take Xiaoqian, for example. He's the sole heir to the Daoguan in Manjin, the largest city in the Chengdu region, and a proud member of the alliance. Another pillar of Manjin's public life is Manjin Radio, a celebrated station whose broadcasts carry across both Kanto and Chengdu. Dr. Ogi, the most renowned physician in Kanto, serves as a regular guest host, a testament to the station's influence. The radio studios sit beside the city's maglev railway, occupying what was once an ancient monolithic tower. When the Alliance sent engineers to rebuild it, they uncovered iridescent rainbow and silver feathers atop the old structure, relics that only deepened the tower's mystery. Today, this reconstructed spire stands as one of Manjin's most recognizable landmarks. Alongside it looms the sprawling Manjin department store, another famed destination in the city. Zheng Jin once ran a bold advertisement declaring there wasn't a single item or skill you couldn't purchase here. Though that campaign was eventually pulled, it spoke volumes about the department. T-Store's clout. No ordinary retailer would dare stake such a claim. And Manjin Department Store isn't just the gleaming structure you see above ground. Beneath it lies a labyrinth of undisclosed basement levels. What secrets those depths hold, nobody knows. Years ago, when Ethan was still alive, he received orders to infiltrate those subterranean floors. He pressed in as far as he could, but the guards proved too vigilant. Reluctantly, he had to abort the mission, one of the few failures in an otherwise impeccable record. Translator's note. If you're having trouble joining the group, please message me directly or contact the admins. Thanks for your support. Don't forget to bookmark and recommend. Chapter 107, Long Lost Training. At the very heart of Manjin City lies Manjin Game City, a vast entertainment complex pulsing with neon lights, ringing coins, and the constant whirl of slot machines. Trainers and ordinary citizens alike flock here whenever they crave a rush of excitement or the chance at a big win. Every spin of the reels can spark triumphant cheers or agonized curses, making the place feel alive from open until close. Originally, Manjin's most feared gangster held complete control of the complex and its profits. His operation was so lucrative and his influence so widespread that the Alliance finally stepped in and forced him out. They couldn't allow any one criminal to monopolize such a moneymaker. Not long after, the facility was folded into the Alliance's network and rebranded under the name Manjindao Pavilion. In theory, it's under Alliance management now, but in practice, the old gang still runs day-to-day operations. They've learned to follow Alliance directives, yet they haven't lost their swagger or their underground connections. Team Rocket, of course, didn't miss out on this opportunity. Although it's unclear exactly how Rocket's share of the profits is negotiated, there's no doubt they're involved. Ethan has only heard whispers among the staff. What is certain is that the Rocket presence here is formidable. Stationed on the pavilion's floor is a top-ranked Rocket operative, ever watchful and ready to enforce the organization's interests in this electric den of chance and danger. Ethan couldn't tell exactly who they were dealing with, but anyone capable of going toe-to-toe with the Mankindo Museum certainly wasn't a pushover. In Game City, things aren't as simple as just logging in and playing. Every game has its own virtual currency, and these tokens can be exchanged for Union credits at a fixed rate, and vice versa, though few players ever bother. Each game's currency also appears on a citywide redemption list. If you've amassed enough points, you can trade them in for virtually anything on offer. Rumor even claims there's a way to convert game tokens into a quasi-god-elf currency, but no one's ever verified it. As it stands, the official exchange rate is 1 Game City credit to 100 Union credits. Yet because certain vendors accept only Union credits and others only game tokens, savvy players must decide which currency to hold onto and which to spend, based on what they intend to buy. Ethan ran these thoughts over in his mind as the stretch limousine glided through the outskirts of Manjin City. Before them lay an enormous manor, its stone walls and manicured lawns stretching as far as the eye could see. This was Xiaoqian's home. "Here we are, Ethan," Wu Xiaoqian said with a soft laugh, nudging him gently as the car came to a stop. "Would you like to accompany me to see my grandfather, or would you rather explore on your own?" Xiaoqian asked as they strolled through the estate's rose gardens. Ethan paused. "Thank you, but I'd prefer to skip the formalities today. Since this is my first trip to the Chengdu region, I'm keen to browse the local elven crafts and do some shopping." Xiaoqian nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Grandfather is a king-level powerhouse, and it's improper for ordinary guests to drop in unannounced. I'll go see him first, and then catch up with you. Libo, please show Ethan to his room." "Right away, Miss Qian," Libo replied with a respectful bow. A few moments later, they arrived at a smaller building set just west of the main house. Libo produced a gleaming brass key and handed it to Ethan. "Master Ethan, here is the key to your quarters. We've cleaned and prepared the room for you. Should you need anything, simply call one of the maids." "Thank you, Libo," Ethan said, slipping the key into his pocket. He didn't mind the guest wing. It was common for grand estates to keep visitors in a separate building. With a final nod, he turned toward the west wing, eager both to settle in and to discover what treasures the elven markets of Chengdu might hold. Some things are best left alone for both host and guest. Ethan nodded, acknowledging Libo's warning, and turned to leave the Xiaoqian family manor. From the doorway, Libo watched his retreating figure, noticing a curious gleam along Ethan's shoulders. "Young people these days," he muttered, "you just can't read them." Ethan didn't hear. He followed the broad avenue that led toward Manjin City, but before reaching the gates, he slipped onto a narrower path veering into the suburban woodlands. As he ventured deeper, shafts of dappled sunlight danced on the undergrowth. Occasionally, furtive shapes, wild elves, peered from behind ancient tree trunks, yet none dared approach, deterred by the low growls of unseen beasts shadowing Ethan's steps. After nearly 30 minutes, the trees grew so tall and dense that the sky vanished from view. Here, the familiar unicorns grazing in glades and glowing green caterpillars clinging to vines had all but disappeared. In their place, clusters of bright red ladybugs and plump round spiders, species common near Chengdu, draped themselves across branches and curled leaves. They lounged in the tranquil hush, as if in no hurry to stir from their sunlit slumber. "Go Murkrow! Go Miltank!" Ethan sent out 2 great balls in quick succession. Earlier, he'd swapped his standard Pokeballs for these upgrades. He knew his Pokémon would feel more at ease inside. A sharp cry split the air. Murkrow burst forth, wings beating furiously as it cawed its excitement. Right beside it, Miltank emerged with a gentle low, standing quietly at Ethan's side. "Haunter, scout the perimeter. Make sure no other trainers are within a mile." From Ethan's shadow drifted Haunter, its spectral grin gleaming. With an eerie "ha-ha!" it slipped back into darkness, then soared in a silent circuit above the grove. Moments later, it reappeared, bobbing in the air to signal the area was clear. "Good job, Haunter," Ethan praised, offering a nod. He glanced at Murkrow and Miltank, both alert and eager. "I haven't had a chance to train in days. Since we've got this place to ourselves, let's work on our battle drills." With that, Ethan set his team into position, ready to sharpen their skills under the tranquil canopy of the grove. Chapter 12. A Day of Training. I stood before my unusual squad, Dark Crow, the clumsy beast, Ghost, and the enormous Miltank, as they buzzed with anticipation. Dark Crow flapped its inky wings and let out a sharp "gah!" The clumsy beast barked, "Yeah!" Even the Miltank emitted a contented "meet me." I raised a hand for silence. "All right, let's get started." Turning to Dark Crow, I outlined today's objectives. Your focus is on controlling your evil energy and quickening the awakening release. Work on channeling that darkness cleanly and speeding up the reaction time. Dark Crow let loose a victorious caw and circled overhead, eager to begin. Next was the clumsy beast. You'll train your water energy. I want rapid-fire water gun bursts, followed by mental shaping of the stream into a spinning strike. Push your reflexes. Be fast and precise. The beast thudded its tail against the ground in agreement, ready to charge into the water drills. I paused, turning to Ghost, who hovered uncertainly. Your level is still low, so today you'll spar. First with me, then against the forest elves. Treat every elf you defeat as one step closer to mastering your power. Don't hold back. Ghost swallowed hard, then nodded, determination flickering in its eyes. Finally, I addressed the milk tank. Its massive form rippled as it prepared for duty. Logistics duty first. You'll provide milk supplements to the others during breaks. After that, focus on restorative and physical conditioning. Build your stamina and strength. The milk tank gave a low, humming rumble of acknowledgement. With assignments set, I stepped back. The forest erupted in movement. Dark Crow's shadow passed over treetops. The clumsy beast raced off toward the stream. Ghost glowed as it phased through training dummies, and the milk tank ambled after me to begin its support role. This was their daily grind, and mine. As their trainer, I'd push each of them to their limits. Tomorrow, they'd be stronger, and I would be ready for whatever challenge came next. Ethan surveyed the elves as they dispersed to begin their exercises. Remember, he called out, while you were surviving in the wild, your nutrition was never enough. Now that you're properly fed, your bodies can and must surpass their previous limits. With that, he released the training outline he'd prepared. Each elf picked up their gear and moved to a training station, eager to put Ethan's lessons into practice. Once they'd all set to work, Ethan slipped away to a quiet corner of the clearing. He drew from his satchel the peculiar training manual he'd acquired, an instruction book on unlocking superhuman abilities through meditation. Though cultivation techniques weren't guaranteed to help in their modern struggle, he was desperate to explore every avenue that might enhance his power. Settling cross-legged on the soft grass, Ethan flipped to the first page. He closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, just as the manual described. Inhale deeply, trace an inner flow of energy, center your mind. At first his thoughts wandered, memories of the forest, the sharp pang of hunger, the faces of those he'd sworn to protect. But with steady effort, he guided himself back, channeling a subtle warmth from his core to his fingertips. Minutes stretched into an hour. Ethan's breath grew more even, his pulse steadied, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he felt something shift beneath his skin. Whether it was real or only the product of hope, he could not yet tell. What mattered was that he refused to stop trying. When he finally opened his eyes, the training ground before him was alive with motion. The elves, sweating but determined, had already pushed themselves past yesterday's limits. Ethan rose, tucking the manual back into his bag. If cultivation could grant him even a fraction more strength, speed, or endurance, then he would master it, and with every bit of power he gained, his people would stand an even better chance of surviving the trials to come. Chapter 108, Manjin Game City. Ethan spent the entire afternoon training his companions. Dark Crow and Foolish Beast ran through their regular skill drills, while the big milk tank, whose primary role was to supply milk to the other elves, joined them for basic physical exercises whenever it wasn't on delivery duty. Thanks to tips he'd picked up from Xiaoqian, Ethan had identified the milk tank's weak points and taught it more efficient ways to build strength. The routine wasn't especially grueling, but the results showed almost immediately. Meanwhile, the ghosts, Ethan's ghostly allies, were testing their mettle in skirmishes against the local elves. The nearby elves were low level, and the ghosts frequently challenged them one after another, pressing their advantage in swift, thrilling duels. Victorious every time, the ghosts at last leveled up, rising to level 15. Their progress had been slow at first, partly because they started from such a low base, but more significantly because they'd spent their formative days confined to the ghost caverns on the Trial Isle, where training focuses almost exclusively on basic skills and endurance. By day's end, Ethan surveyed his team with quiet satisfaction. Dark Crow's wing strikes were sharper, Foolish Beast's ferocity had grown, the milk tank was stronger than ever, and the ghosts moved with a confidence that mirrored their new rank. The next stage of their journey lay just ahead, Manjin Game City, and Ethan knew these gains would make all the difference. Ethan's progress had been astonishing at first. With only a thin reservoir of spirit energy to his name, every bit he gained felt monumental, and he leveled up almost overnight. But as he climbed higher, the benefits of his earlier efforts began to taper off. Before long, his spirit rank would slow to the steady, painstaking pace every cultivator eventually faced. That afternoon, Ethan tried his first true meditation. He settled into position and managed to hold still for 30 seconds, but then his concentration snapped. Real meditation demands perfect emptiness of mind, a blank slate free of every distraction. The paradox is that the older and more experienced you are, the harder it becomes. Memories, doubts, and fleeting impressions fill every corner of consciousness. Most beginners can quiet their thoughts with practice, but Ethan's mind was unusually cluttered. What seemed easy to others was his greatest barrier. He did pick up a few techniques along the way, yet even now, it took him many times longer than his peers to slip into stillness. Without a stable meditative state, he couldn't access the full power he'd been training for. While he struggled, Ethan put his spectral guardians to work. He entrusted them with the delicate task of tending both the claw-tailed scorpion's elven eggs and Kira's precious brood, ensuring the eggs would receive constant care even as he grappled with his own cultivation. Ethan glanced at the incubator's display. The claw-tailed scorpion egg would hatch in 2 days, but for Kira's elven egg it simply read, "Incubation period unknown." He tapped his chin, thinking ahead. South of Immersive City in Chengdu, there was a renowned elf breeding house. If he could spare the time tomorrow, he'd take Kira there to see whether their experts might coax the egg to hatch. Better yet, he could connect his chip directly to the breeder's cultivation database, expanding its neural map and searching for any precedent that matched Kira's mysterious egg. But that was a plan for tomorrow. Tonight, all he could do was rest and prepare. He brushed dust from his cloak and lifted a hand. "Dismiss," he ordered the dark crows. They settled to a halt, their weapons lowering. Although they drilled relentlessly all afternoon, not one of them showed visible wariness. That was thanks to the cavernous milk tank they'd installed back at camp, its enchanted milk, a potent remedy for elven fatigue. Still, no draught in the world could replace a break. Minds grow sluggish long before muscles do, and this afternoon's high-intensity regimen had pushed them to their limit. Ethan nodded to himself. Tomorrow would bring new hurdles, but for now the dark crows deserved a chance to recover, and so did he. He turned toward the camp's lanterns, letting the warm glow chase away the shadows of the day. I slipped the dark crow and the oversized milk can into the elf ball one after the other, and Geesey melted into my shadow without a sound. With my silent beast at my side, I struck out for the main road just beyond the manor's gates. Because I was unfamiliar with the route, it took me nearly half an hour to reach the road, almost double the 20 minutes it had taken me to leave it. By then, the sun hung low in the western treetops, but I had no intention of returning to Xiaoqian's house. Instead, I was bound for the heart of Manjin City. Another 30 minutes passed before the first car appeared, a sure sign of how vast the Xiaoqian estate truly was, and I found myself sighing at the might and influence of such a powerful family. Finally, I flagged down a taxi. Under the driver's curious gaze, I directed him toward Manjin's famous game city. I knew this place better than most. In my previous life, I'd spent countless hours wandering these neon-lit arcades after mastering the use of gaming chips. It was here that I'd even redeemed the second Elder Elf, but wary of being swindled, I'd never dared to return. Game City's exchange listings for elves and props were impressively comprehensive, practically on par with what Rockets offered. The catch was that you could only spend in-game currency. Otherwise, plenty of wealthy players would have no qualms about blowing countless alliance coins to get their favorite elves. Of course, that's also why Game City never ran at a loss. Elves came in every tier. If you hit the jackpot, you could walk away with a rare green or even cyan elf. If you struck out, you might only get a common red or orange one. It was a form of gambling, and Game City thrived on that. After handing the taxi driver a full 200 union coins, Ethan climbed out holding his sluggish beast. As he approached the entrance, two doormen stepped forward and gestured at a nearby sign. No superpowered beings allowed inside. Ethan's beast, though slow, was a water element creature with latent supernatural abilities. In other words, it fell squarely under the ban. Game City's rules were simple and strict. No bypassing the console's built-in switches. Super elves weren't allowed to manipulate the machines remotely. Ethan had almost forgotten that regulation, so after a brief moment of hesitation, he stowed away his dull beast and approached the entrance under the guard's watchful eyes. The moment he stepped inside, he was hit by a swirl of noise and a jumble of scents that made him want to sneeze. Almost every machine here was a classic slot console, deceptively simple to play, yet utterly addictive. The thrill of gambling came from its raw, black-and-white stakes. You either won big or lost everything. No gray areas, no middle ground. Even though it was nearly dinner time, the hall was crowded. From one row of machines came jubilant shouts as winners drew a circle of onlookers, proudly flashing their coins. From another row rose the thud of fists against metal and muffled curses as losers fumed over their bad luck. All around, faces told stories of elation and despair, the two sides of every bet laid bare. If you stop to take a closer look, you'll notice there are far more losers than winners in Game City. Only a rare few ever walk away with a smile. Those who lose can't resist trying again, convinced they're just one play away from victory. And the winners? They're often so buoyed by their luck that they keep pushing for even bigger wins. Yet in the end, almost nobody redeems those hard-earned prizes. That's precisely how Game City turns a profit. Collect your best stories, and don't forget to recommend this. Chapter 109, Family. Ethan's arrival in Game City drew virtually no notice, like a single drop vanishing into a vast ocean. Only he felt the faint ripples trailing behind him. To everyone else, nothing had changed. Inside these walls, vice and spectacle reigned. Neon lights blazed so brightly that even though night ruled the skies beyond its gates, the city's interior shone as if it were midday. Every evening, Game City came alive with gamblers and thrill-seekers, ready to spend and lose everything they had. In every corridor and aisle, impeccably dressed attendants in black suits and mirrored sunglasses paced with silent precision. Their wireless headsets allowed them to coordinate effortlessly as they scanned the crowds for anyone daring to cheat. Those who tried often met the same fate, subdued, bound, and hauled off to a small windowless interrogation room, known here simply as the Black Room. But the men in suits were only part of the city's watchful eye. Hidden cameras, some tucked into ceiling fixtures, others concealed behind decorative panels, recorded every gesture and whispered conversation. In Game City, nothing escaped surveillance. Every move was tracked, every face logged, and every transaction monitored. Ethan took in the spectacle with cautious curiosity. He had heard the city's warnings and seen the warnings posted at every entrance. Here, fortune could smile on you one moment and vanish the next, and there was no place to hide when the cameras were always watching. Ethan stepped up to the counter and slid into one of the 20 exchange terminals. The receptionist gave him a pitying, almost reproachful smile, but didn't charge him a single coin. These machines were meant for players who wanted to swap their in-game currency for virtual items, yet across the sprawling Game City, home to thousands of avatars, only 2 or 3 people ever bothered using them. On Ethan's screen, the redemption list scrolled steadily, laying bare the Alliance's iron grip on the city's resources. Every rare elven artifact and precious relic was on display, each tagged with its current bid and the slim number of tokens needed to claim it. Even those intent on redeeming prizes rarely held enough game coins to meet the asking prices. Ethan shook his head as he studied the figures. No matter how many times he refreshed the list, the costs still left him reeling. The top 3 items were prohibitively expensive, but the very first entry stunned him most. A quasi-divine relic crafted by Yukila in Chengdu. Its redemption fee was so astronomically high that Ethan could almost feel his hopes slipping away. Ethan stared at the exchange board in disbelief. 50 million game coins, that's just the sticker price. Converted into Alliance coins, it balloons to 5 billion. It even outstrips the rocket's demigod redemption fee. Since rocket points roughly equal Union coins, a demigod costs 3 to 4 billion Union coins there. Rockets are already infamous for price gouging, but this was on another level. Who could possibly qualify to redeem a demigod here? Ordinary players don't have that kind of money. If wealthy collectors truly wanted a demigod, they'd redeem one elsewhere. Clearly, this was a flashy showpiece meant to lure in big spenders. The top 100 reward items are notoriously scarce, and their opening bids start in the millions of game coins. Most players can only look from afar. Even though Ethan had pored over lists like this in his previous life, seeing it again still made him shake his head and marvel at how brilliantly this game city knows how to turn virtual currency into cold, hard cash. Ethan scanned the mission list once more as he walked out of the game city. Today's objective was simply reconnaissance, get a feel for the venue, note any changes since his last life here, and confirm that he had enough trade goods on hand. Tomorrow, the real adventure would begin. Stepping beyond the city walls, he inhaled a deep, clear breath of fresh air. He headed straight for a little tavern just outside the gates. The proprietor greeted him with shining eyes, and when Ethan ordered enough food to feed 10 people, the man's grin practically split his face. With the arrival of their newest party member, the hulking milk tank, whose enormous appetite had instantly claimed the title of best eater, Ethan had to adjust his provisions. The elves in his group might survive on energy cubes alone, but they adored genuine, hearty meals, and Ethan liked to keep them happy. Sure enough, it felt as if each elf carried 2 stomachs, one for cubes, one for real food. Before long, the tavern owner was carefully packing platters of roasted meat, steaming buns, fresh fruit, and other delicacies into Ethan's dimensional storage ring. Satisfied that his party would want for nothing, Ethan flagged down a passing taxi. Under the bemused gaze of the driver, he rode out to the Shao Kahn family manor. The great iron gates swung open at his approach, as though they'd been waiting for him all along. Ethan stepped inside with calm confidence. Tomorrow's trials could come, but tonight, at least, his team would feast. Ethan paused at the threshold as Li Bo stepped forward with a courteous bow. "Master Ethan, you've returned," he announced. "The master has been waiting for you." Ethan's brow lifted at that. Master? The owner of this manor? A man of real influence in Manjin? He offered a slight nod and fell into step behind Li Bo. Reluctance tugged at him. He had no particular wish to meet the famed elderly lord of the estate, but everyone here had shown him deference, and he would not be rude. They wound westward down a lofty corridor whose vaulted ceiling and stone arches gave it the air of a castle. At last they halted before an unadorned door set into the thick wall. Li Bo rapped gently with his knuckles. "Master! Master Ethan has come back!" A hearty voice answered from within, crisp and energetic despite its age. "Come in." Li Bo pushed the door open and motioned Ethan inside. Once Ethan stepped over the threshold, the door swung shut behind him, and Li Bo stood quietly outside, waiting. Ethan pushed open the door and stepped into a room that couldn't have been more different from the ornate corridors he just passed through. Here, luxury was abandoned in favor of bare functionality, a simple desk, 3 chairs, and nothing else. Seated on one of them, swinging her legs, was Xiao Qian. When she noticed him, she paused mid-swing, stuck out her tongue in apology, and her eyes brimmed with regret. "Ha! So this is Ethan," said an elderly man with a full head of white hair, smiling warmly from behind the desk. "Still young, but I hear you're quite promising." He gestured toward an empty chair. "Please, have a seat." Ethan inclined his head in acknowledgement, said nothing, and slid onto the chair beside Xiao Qian. The instant his weight settled, Xiao Qian leaned close. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have told my grandfather about us meeting." He drew a steadying breath. If there was one thing these great families never overlooked, it was the company their heirs kept. The patriarch prided himself on knowing exactly how his granddaughter spent her evenings and whom she invited. Even Ethan's carefully obscured background hadn't escaped notice once Xiao Qian mentioned his name. On paper, there was nothing, but the mere act of association was enough to trigger concern. Ethan forced a small, reassuring smile for her sake. Inside, however, he knew they now faced a new obstacle, gaining this family's full trust. And that was going to take far more than polite introductions. Ethan was the only civilian ever known to produce intermediate energy cubes. No one had explained how he'd mastered the process, where he'd studied, or what training he'd undergone. There was simply no noteworthy background to speak of. He gave a slight shake of his head, indicating it wasn't important. Silence settled over the room for a moment before the elderly man spoke. "Young man," he said quietly, "even though that girl, Xiaoqian, has already told me of your skill, I still have to ask, where did you learn the recipe for these mid-level energy cubes?" Chapter 110, Facing the Patriarch. Ethan's eyebrows shot up at the patriarch's blunt question. In the world of breeders, everyone jealously guarded their methods. Each had spent years refining unique formulas and processes. To demand those secrets on the spot was a grave breach of etiquette. A stronger or more temperamental breeder might have simply walked away in offense. "Grandpa," Xiaoqian, Ethan's host for the afternoon, was the first to speak up. Normally she was polite and composed, but witnessing her friend publicly challenged so rudely sparked her ire. "That's really disrespectful." He Qingmu, the family patriarch, ignored her entirely, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Ethan as if daring him to speak or flinch. The hush in the room grew heavier with each passing second, all attention riveted on Ethan's next move. Xiaoqian huffed in frustration, folding her arms across her chest. "Grandpa, you're completely ignoring me," she protested, stamping one foot. Still, He Qingmu's expression did not waver. The cold calm in his gaze reminded Ethan exactly why civilian trainers were at a disadvantage when summoned by one of the great breeder families. Here, there was no equal status, only the will of the patriarch. Ethan took a steadying breath, meeting the old man's unblinking stare. He knew this moment would define how much trust and respect he could earn from the family's head. Ethan stood his ground, calm and unflinching. As a mid-level trainer, he was only slightly above the average, but that was enough. "I made it myself," he said quietly, his tone cool and controlled. Anyone else might bristle at being sized up so dispassionately, but Hawad merely studied Ethan's face as though he intended to remember every detail. Then, as if on cue, Hawad's stern expression dissolved into warm laughter. "Ha! Excuse me, old folks can be a bit intrusive. Please don't take offense." In an instant, the imposing pavilion master transformed into a kindly grandfather, his eyes crinkling with amusement. Aya, standing off to the side, met Ethan's glance. He offered a faint dismissive smirk, but she remained unreadable. Despite the apology, they both knew Hawad's amiability often came with a hidden agenda. Clearing his throat, Hawad adopted a more formal tone. "My name is Hawad. I oversee the Taoist Pavilion in Manjin City, and I'm Xiaoqian's grandfather." A few measured coughs later, he added, "I understand the arrangement between you and Xiaoqian, and I've examined the intermediate energy cube you provided. It's outstanding, precisely what our cultivation methods require. After integrating it, our disciples' core reserves increased by over 30%. Ethan watched Hawad's eyes widen as he held one of the energy cubes between his fingers. He just explained that these special cubes could dramatically increase an elf's milk yield, and now Hawad, his expression equal parts astonished and thrilled, immediately made an offer. "I'll pay 30 million union coins for your formula," Hawad declared without hesitation. "Name your price. I can raise the funds." 30 million union coins. Even for ambitious civilian trainers, that was a staggering sum, enough startup capital that many wouldn't dare dream of. With that kind of money, a trainer could invest in the best care, equipment, and support staff necessary to guide an elf to elite status. Some might even leverage it to join the Alliance's official missions and rise through its ranks, though in reality, 99% of elf trainers never made it that far. Ethan simply shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I can't sell it." Hawad blinked. "But 30 million. "I know it's a lot," Ethan replied, "but these cubes aren't just valuable. They're irreplaceable. And between my existing assets and the revenue they bring in, I'm on track to earn far more than that. I can't give away an edge this powerful." Hawad hesitated, visibly taken aback by Ethan's flat refusal. He hadn't expected such conviction, nor such confidence in future returns. For a moment, the two stood in silence, the unspoken no ledge of the cube's potential hanging heavy in the air. Ethan stared at the ledger one more time. 30 million union coins, almost an unthinkable fortune for ordinary citizens. Even so, he couldn't accept the deal. If he was backed into a corner, a bribe like this might solve his problems. But what if it ever became public? The Grand Alliance was far from monolithic. Political rivals would leap at any excuse to bring down the elves' big milk tank faction. And there were plenty of people nursing grudges against them, far more than just the Joeys or the Junshas. Their power rested on the production of vital mana. Yes, but that also meant they were prime targets for intrigue. Ethan loosened his grip on the pen and looked up at Hawad. After a long silence, Hawad sighed and offered a new proposal. "All right," he said. "Here's what I'm willing to do. From now on, however many energy cubes you produce, we'll take every single one of them at a fixed price of 120 union coins apiece." Ethan nodded. He knew exactly why Hawad was willing to make such generous terms. The elite big milk tanks they'd bred required enormous amounts of energy cubes each day to maintain their peak mana output. That high-grade, richly mana-infused milk fetched top prices with the upper crust. The run-of-the-mill, glutinous milk you found in the market, simply from grazing on common pastures, couldn't hold a candle to it. With Hawad's guarantee, Ethan could finally stabilize production without fear of political backlash and secure a future for his herd. Ethan's latest deal had earned him far more than a mere 20 union coins, a testament to how deftly Hawad handled his trade ventures. Ethan leaned forward. "I'd like to get my hands on the Grand Tank training manual." The Grand Tank elves were unrivaled in cultivation knowledge. No other family or clan studied every facet of training as exhaustively. While the manual Ethan requested wasn't their most jealously guarded secret, even its basic lessons outstripped everything he'd learned so far. Normally, he wouldn't have to state his desires so bluntly, but Hawad insisted on formal negotiations. Ethan couldn't very well refuse. After all, noble houses like the Grand Tanks operated with endless caution. They'd never part with their techniques if a peaceful resolution threatened their core interests. But as long as their fundamental secrets remained intact, they were willing to make exceptions. Hawad grinned and nodded without hesitation. "Very well. It's only the standard manual, nothing you couldn't find elsewhere if you knew the right channels. Our deepest secrets, though? You won't see those." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "So, are you satisfied, or is there anything else you need to discuss?" "Ethan, let's go," Xiaoqian called, springing to her feet. She grasped his arm and led him out of the old man's study. Ethan didn't resist. He followed quietly, his expression composed. From the outside, the corridor looked pristine, but behind those carved doors, half the League lurked like parasites, feigning loyalty while sucking the Alliance dry. They were the rot at its core. Once their footsteps faded, Libo slipped into the study. He bowed to Hawad and spoke in a hushed tone. "Master, is everything all right?" Hawad's lips curved into a thin, knowing smile. He pulled open a drawer and withdrew a thick dossier. "Take a look at this," he said, spreading the papers on his desk. The file contained every detail of Ethan's Alliance standing, compiled in a single afternoon of behind-the-scenes work. Libo leaned in. "He doesn't have much, just some petty credits." Hawad nodded, flipping through balance sheets and mission logs. "True, but this boy—" He paused, eyes narrowing. "The younger generation in the League keeps raising the bar. First it was the heir of the Yulong family, now someone like Ethan, rising from the middle ranks and hiding his true strength. Whatever he's concealing, we lack the resources to dig deeper, at least for now. It's wiser not to provoke him until we know more." He said the file with a soft sigh and slid it back into the drawer. "Keep an eye on him. That's all we need to do, for the moment." Libo bowed again, and together they left the study, the afternoon light fading behind them. "It looks like you'd like me to polish and rewrite a chapter, but I'll need the full text of that chapter in order to proceed. Could you please paste the machine-translated chapter here? Once I have the text, I'll revise it into smooth, idiomatic English, rename Aoki to Ethan as your main character, and ensure he's consistently portrayed as male." Chapter 111, The Nurturing House. Xiaoxian walked Ethan out of the nurturing house. As they crossed the threshold, she glanced at him with regret. "I'm really sorry for all the trouble. I swear I won't slip out again." Her words died on her lips when her grandfather's stern voice boomed from the courtyard. Ethan just waved her concerns away. He'd expected this interruption. His alias was flawless. Even the League's far-reaching records showed no link between him and the Xiao family. Their influence simply didn't penetrate that deeply. In return for a heavy armored tank training manual, Ethan considered the deal more than fair, especially since he was short on funds. He bowed politely to her grandfather's offer of extra compensation and then made his way back to his guest suite alone. By the time he arrived, the elves in the dining hall had yet to be served. As a matter of course, Ethan asked Gweesy to sweep the entire room for hidden surveillance devices. The odds of finding one were slim, but in their world, caution was never wasted. Ethan paused at the threshold, glanced left and right to make sure no one was watching, and called out in a low voice, "Come on, you block-headed beasts, dark-crowned ravens and milk-bellied gluttons." In an instant, the elves materialized around him. Ethan knelt by his pack, fished out a handful of sealed rations, and laid them on a flat rock. The moment he gave the signal, his companions pounced. They tore into cured meats, chunks of hard bread, and dried fruits like wolves starved for days. The newest recruit, already nicknamed Big Milk Can for his bottomless thirst, dove in with equal fervor. After downing a cup of fresh milk, he fit in as if he'd been with the group forever, his whiskers frosted in white. Despite their hunger, none of the elves forgot to share. Plates were swapped, bites were traded, and laughter echoed across the clearing. When the last crumb was gone, Ethan led them through their usual pre-sleep routine. While the others settled into meditation circles, he opted for something more physical, push-ups, squats, and a quick jog around the manor's perimeter. At 15, Ethan was still growing, and the extra nutrition and exercise had already begun to erase all trace of the scrawny boy he once was on Trial Island. Before dawn's first light, his internal clock roused him. He stirred his sleepy companions and slipped out of the sprawling estate into the cool morning air. He'd already exchanged contact information with Xiaoqian earlier. There was no need for goodbyes. Deep down, Ethan knew he wouldn't be returning here anytime soon. With the elves at his heels, he headed off toward whatever adventures lay ahead. Despite still being forbidden from returning to her clan, her spirits had brightened since her conversations with Madame Xiaoqian, renowned for her warm generosity and the gentle encouragement of the elves. Ordinary conversation no longer left her cheeks flushed. An hour later, at the southern edge of Manjin City, Ethan arrived at the famed elf breeding house that villagers across Chengdu spoke of in hushed tones. He stood beneath its carved eaves wearing the standard trainer's uniform, accompanied by a small, pink creature whose vacant expression lent it an almost comical air. The courtyard was quiet. A few visitors cradled the soft bodies of newly hatched elves, while others balanced precious eggs in both arms. Inside, trainers and families gathered in pockets of low conversation, each waiting for their own turn. For Ethan, this was entirely new. He'd never before stepped foot in an official breeding facility. Pushing open the heavy doors, he discovered an open demonstration already underway. On a modest wooden dais stood a young woman of about 20, her thick-rimmed glasses lending her a scholarly air. She moved confidently through the fundamentals of elf care, weaving in technical terms, but always pausing to translate them into clear, everyday language. The audience followed her every word, nodding with eager attention. Ethan slipped in, at the back, his arrival scarcely noticed by the speaker or the other spectators. He let the creature at his side settle onto the cool stone floor as he took in the scene, ready, for the first time, to learn what it truly meant to nurture an elf. Ethan stood a few paces back, watching as several of the attendees propped open notebooks and furiously recorded every word the young instructor said. Truth be told, her lecture was elementary, nothing more than the basic care guidelines for newly minted trainers or anyone who had just acquired their first elf. But this crowd wasn't made up of seasoned professionals. It was filled with wide-eyed boys and girls taking their first tentative steps into the elf-taming world. As you head home today, remember to look after your elves with care, the instructor was saying, her voice calm and clear. If you've been given an elf egg, leave it in the incubator until it hatches. Don't remove it prematurely. Eggs need stable warmth and humidity to develop properly. That's the best way to ensure your elf comes into the world healthy and strong. With that, she lowered her notebook and smiled. That concludes today's class. Safe travels, everyone. Most of the crowd began to drift away, but Ethan lingered. A small group had crowded around her, peppering her with questions about incubator settings, feeding schedules, and elbow grease for shell cleanups. He'd seen plenty of alliance trainers who, despite their reputation, barely understood these fundamentals. Even the future champion Jai, the same Jai who would one day dominate every league, had started out just as clueless, relying on instinct and occasional luck. Ethan edged closer, determined to catch every last tip he could. Not everyone carried a full wizard's tome on their journeys, so public classes like this were rare and invaluable. As he stepped into the circle, the instructor looked up, meeting his gaze with a welcoming nod. "You've got a question?" she asked. Ethan returned her smile and nodded. "Yes, about incubator temperature. I've been having trouble keeping it steady." He leaned in, ready to absorb every detail. In a world brimming with magic and mystery, even the simplest lesson could make all the difference. Ethan wove his way through the crowd that had gathered around the girl. Finally, after half an hour of questions and hushed whispers, he drew close enough to speak. "Excuse me," he said, offering a polite nod. "Do you have a moment? I'm trying to look up some information, but I'm running into trouble. Is there a computer I could use?" The girl adjusted the heavy lenses perched on her nose and gave him a courteous smile. "I'm sorry," she replied, "but our database isn't open to the public. If you tell me exactly what you need, I'll do my best to help. And if I can't find the answer myself, I'll consult my grandparents. They're both senior experts here at the breeding house." Ethan exhaled, disappointment flickering in his eyes. Still, he forced a grateful smile. "I appreciate that. Thank you. I have a few technical parameters I need to verify for my research on elven lineage." She nodded, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Understood. Go ahead and tell me what you're looking for." As they moved to a quieter corner, Ethan realized why the girl had been so reluctant at first. In the elven world, knowledge was fiercely guarded. The most prestigious breeding houses jealously protected the secret techniques and data they'd accumulated over centuries. A few would occasionally host free public lectures, this one being among the more generous, but their core archives remained off-limits. Less scrupulous establishments charged exorbitant fees just to attend basic classes, and commissioning the actual cultivation of an elf could cost a small fortune. Ethan braced himself to explain the gaps in his own notes, hopeful that this girl, and by extension, her expert grandparents, might finally shed light on the problems he'd hit. Ethan smiled and nodded. "I've never run into this before," he said. "All the diagnostic ratings on my elven egg look normal, but under incubation time it just says unknown." The young attendant pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose, propped her chin on her hand, and studied him thoughtfully. After a moment, she offered a small, apologetic smile. "I'm sorry," she said. "Without any record of this egg's history, it's hard to say what's going on. If you don't mind waiting, you can stay here. My grandparents are away at the breeder exchange and should be back later today." Ethan hesitated, concern etched on his face. "I understand, but could you at least pull up the egg's data on the computer now? I'll stay right beside you. Watch every step. And I promise I won't touch anything else. I'm more than happy to cover any fees." The attendant nodded thoughtfully, then led him toward the terminal, tapping at the screen as Ethan followed close behind, determined to uncover the mystery of Kira's elven egg. Chapter 112, Stealing Data. The girl hesitated, brow furrowed in thought. Normally, no one but her grandparents and a handful of the most trusted trainers ever touched the cultivation house's computer. It contained top-secret records, everything from breeding logs to troop deployments, and even she needed a password to gain entry. Still, Ethan was different. She'd never met anyone quite like him, calm yet earnest, with a gentle smile that put his powerful beasts at ease. His presence exuded a quiet confidence, and she suspected he already knew more than most trainers about the inner workings of the Alliance. She took a breath. "All right," she said at last. "First, I'll need to register your Alliance ID card in our system. After that, you can operate the computer, but only when I'm with you." Ethan returned her gaze with an easy nod, his smile unfazed. "Thank you. I appreciate your help." Guided by the girl, Ethan walked down a low-arched hallway to a small study at the rear of the cultivation house. The door bore silver runes that shimmered faintly in the torchlight. Inside, a single desk supported a sleek terminal flanked by softly glowing screens. "Here we are," she said, settling behind the keyboard. "Insert your card, please." Ethan followed her instruction. As the interface recognized his credentials, a series of encrypted folders appeared. His pulse quickened. Data was power, and he was determined to see just how much the elves had hidden behind these digital walls. Ethan stepped into the study and paused to take in the rows of towering bookshelves. Every shelf was crammed with volumes, some spines yellowed and brittle with age, others crisp and freshly bound. Handwritten sticky labels marked each section: elven eulogy, incubation methods, cultivation fundamentals, and so on. In one corner, a sleek computer stood glaringly free of dust, a clear sign it saw constant use. A young schoolgirl sat at the desk beside it. With practiced precision, she powered on the machine, entered her password, and summoned the database. The bright glow of the screen confirmed that she was its primary user. When the system finished loading, she rose and gestured for Ethan to take her place. He offered a polite nod, slid into the chair, and began browsing the digital archives. To an untrained eye, he was simply researching elven breeding techniques. Yet Ethan wasn't just looking up general information. His fingers danced knowingly through hidden folders and encrypted files. He employed technical jargon so effortlessly that the girl peered over his shoulder, suddenly impressed by his apparent expertise. Unaware of his true intent, she watched him work. Behind the facade of a routine database search, Ethan was quietly carrying out a second, far more clandestine operation. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment and sent a silent command to the neural implant in his chest. "Chip, begin parsing the data on this system." He'd used the same technique countless times in his previous life, feeding microcurrents from his own body into the host terminal to slip past every firewall without leaving so much as a trace. The implant couldn't hack through networks directly. It needed physical proximity to the source machine. Task established. Estimated time, 10 minutes. Commencing data import. Ethan watched the progress bar flicker to life on the lobby terminal's screen. 10 minutes later, the display blinked green. Mission complete. He stood and offered a small bow. "Thank you for your help, Miss Shui. I didn't find exactly what I was looking for, but your assistance was invaluable. Here, my Alliance ID card." Miss Shui tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her excitement tempered by a hint of disappointment. Ethan could sympathize. She'd hoped to uncover some breakthrough knowledge he hadn't yet mastered, and coming up empty-handed clearly irked her. Still, she took his card and tapped a few keys to register his details in the lobby's database. "Ethan," she said, handing the card back, "you strike me as a promising breeder. Even if you haven't cracked the hatching process yet, don't lose heart. Why don't we keep in touch? I'll consult my grandparents tonight. They've got more experience in this field. Maybe between all of us, we'll find the missing piece." Ethan nodded, slipping the card into his pocket. "I'd appreciate that. Thank you, Miss Shui." As he turned to leave, the implant's status icon pulsed softly beneath his shirt, a reminder that some mysteries were worth the hunt. After the girl finished her registration, she handed Ethan's ID card back to him. "Thanks," he said, forcing a reluctant smile. "How much do I owe you? Just charge it to my bank card." She shook her head. "No need. I'm not interested in money. What I really want is that elven egg you mentioned." Ethan hesitated, disappointed that she wouldn't reveal it right away. At the same time, though, her genuine curiosity sparked something in him. He'd dropped a few technical terms earlier, just to see if she was paying attention, and clearly she was. Her eyes widened, and a faint smile curved her lips, as if she'd found a kindred spirit. In that moment of shared excitement, the air between them lightened. With a final nod, Ethan slipped out of the nurturing house, already eager to follow every lead that might lead him to the mysterious egg. Ethan stepped out of the breeding room and immediately wiped the sweat from his brow. Talking with those elite students had felt like sitting through a punishing exam, each question more relentless than the last. The longer he stayed, the more on edge he became, until finally he'd seized a moment to slip away. He hadn't forgotten to prepare an excuse, just in case someone came looking for him. But first things first, today's real goal was to secure the breeding house data. Fortunately, the elderly caretakers inside hadn't been trained in any aggressive questioning techniques. Otherwise, Ethan might never have convinced them so easily. Chip, access the database and see if you can derive a solution from the Kira Elven egg, he said, setting his small AI assistant down on the bench. The device beeped cheerfully. Mission successfully established. Beginning analysis. Estimated time to completion, 3 days. Time remaining, 2 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, 30 seconds. Ethan nodded. The chip could only cross-reference existing records and run simulations. It still couldn't implement any solution on its own. If it produced a promising approach, he'd have to test it in the field himself. And of course, there was always the chance that even this powerful AI would hit a wall and return no answers at all. But for now, all he could do was wait and hope the chip cracked the Kira Elven egg's mystery before time ran out. Ethan had no choice but to wait. The quasi-divine being that Kira had hatched was already deteriorating. It wouldn't offer any real support, and might even become a burden. After all, raising a quasi-god required astronomical resources, and in the short term their contribution was far below that of ordinary genos. Until one of those spirits fully matured, its combat effectiveness couldn't hold a candle to many standard genies. Now that Ethan understood how to incubate the Kira Elven eggs properly, he wouldn't risk starting another without the resources to sustain it. His priority was to cultivate forces able to fight at once, then turn his attention to the next assignment, and most importantly, the rocket trial mission. Being pulled away from the rocket trial island was a rare exception. He still had to return before the final assessment. If he succeeded, limitless opportunities would open before him. But if he failed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Before setting out for the Aoki Islands, Ethan couldn't shake the memory of what Ying Ying had told him. This next test was unlike any they'd faced before. In the last trial, he'd watched every detail with laser focus, searching for hidden clues in their instructions and environment. Now the lesson was unmistakable. If they wanted to succeed, they had to grow stronger and fast. If you enjoyed this chapter, please bookmark and recommend it. Chapter 113, Good Luck Boy. At noon sharp, the gates of Manjin Game City swung open, and the flood of gamblers and gaming enthusiasts who'd been waiting in line surged forward. Even though the city turns a tidy profit around the clock, its manager deliberately shuts the doors at 2 a.m. every night and doesn't reopen them until noon the next day. It's a form of starvation marketing. If players could gamble endlessly, their initial excitement would fade, and after a string of losses, they might simply stop coming. By enforcing a daily downtime, the gamble remains fresh, players rush back with renewed eagerness, and the crowds stay perpetually hungry for more. At 5 minutes to 12, a swelling throng gathers outside, anticipation crackling in the air. When the clock finally strikes noon, watching the doors part to reveal the bustling interior is nothing short of a Manjin City spectacle. Game City is, after all, a fully licensed arcade under the Alliance's banner. It can't afford to look like a den of profiteering, nor can it let players marathon for days on end. The recent report of someone dying in the halls was a serious blow to the league's reputation, so they've been forced to tighten security at every entrance. When the staff finally swung the doors open, a flood of eager and impatient patrons poured in. Inside, 2 young attendants at the prize counter lounged against the railing, barely awake. Their eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. They looked like they hadn't slept in days. Ethan, the one with silver studs glinting from his ear, pressed a hand to his mouth and stifled a yawn. He wiped a trail of sleep-dried tears from his cheek and glanced toward his partner, who was slumped beside him. "Everything's ready, right? Machines tuned, staff in position?" Ethan asked, voice rough with fatigue. His partner, known to everyone as Wang, snapped awake at the mention of his name. He sat up, shook himself like a dog shaking off water, and grinned. "Relax, man. The machines are precisely calibrated, odds are dialed in, and we've got extra handlers on standby. All that's left is rolling out the red carpet." Ethan gave a satisfied nod and settled back against the counter. Across the crowded floor, rows of brightly lit cabinets beckoned, and the sharp click of tokens echoed in the air. It wouldn't be long before the show began. I watched as Mr. Wang, the the younger brother with the silver earring, nodded approvingly. "I'm optimistic about you. Keep it up," he said, flashing me a confident grin. It was all part of Game City's standard playbook. Management never wanted visitors thinking the place was an impenetrable money pit, so they'd sprinkle in a few big winners to keep hope alive. Behind the scenes, a team of technicians set each machine's payout odds, 1 in 10,000 for the top prize, 1 in 5,000 for the runner-up, and the final say always rested with the bosses upstairs. Every so often, a player would catch a hot streak and chalk it up to pure luck, when in reality, someone had simply raised that machine's winning percentage for the day. And they didn't lose sleep over a few jackpots. Human nature is greedy. Winners always want more, and losers are itching for a rematch. Nobody suspects how tightly the whole operation is controlled. 2 hours passed, and the scene inside Game City barely shifted. Everything fell right back into the same orderly rhythm it followed every day. The arcade buzzed with tension. Aside from a handful of players cheering each time they racked up tokens, most patrons muttered curses under their breath, eyes glued to the flickering machines. Ethan stretched and winced, testing the pain in his side. "It's just a scratch, nothing to worry about," he said, forcing a yawn. Across from him, Wang, the earring-clad kid who dozed off moments before, rubbed the sleep from his eyes. Dark circles underscored the fatigue on Ethan's face, but he refused to show weakness. "Look at this," Ethan grinned as he slid a small pile of tokens across the counter. "One lucky spin, and I netted 1,000 and coins." Wang's jaw tightened. He knew that, at the current exchange rate, 1,000 arcade tokens translated to well over 100,000 alliance credits, a small fortune for someone fresh on the job. Jealousy burned in his voice. "Uh-huh. You sure you didn't glitch the system?" Wang asked, eyes narrowing. "Or is someone letting you fool around behind the scenes?" Ethan's smile only widened. He tapped the machine's screen with casual confidence. "No tricks," he said. "Just pure, unadulterated luck." Around them, the arcade's din swallowed the remark, but Wang heard it loud and clear. And in that charged silence, Ethan knew he'd set his friend's guard on edge. And that, he thought, might work in his favor. Wang narrowed his eyes as he watched Ethan play. Even though Xiaoshang had only just started working at Game City, and Wang himself was still young, he dropped out of school early to take this job. He'd learned to trust his instincts. Something about this lucky kid felt off. Sure, Game City saw plenty of winners, but most walked away with only a few hundred game coins. Once someone's haul crested 1,000, it always raised eyebrows. Xiaoshang shifted uncomfortably. "I don't think there's anything shady going on," he said at last. "He doesn't win every round, he's lost plenty of times, and he hasn't hit any of the major jackpots, just small and medium prizes. He's just lucky." Wang's lips twisted in a half-smile. "Lucky, huh? I remember when I saw a guy win 1,000 coins, drop back down to 800, then bounce back with a 4th-tier prize and push himself over 1,000 again. That kind of back-and-forth luck, it stands out." Neither man spoke for a moment as Ethan racked up yet another modest win. Game City's neon lights reflected off the glass cases full of trinkets and plush toys, the silent promise of what those game coins could buy. For a kid who'd only been here a few days, Ethan's performance was astonishing. And Wang, with years of experience under his belt, was more convinced than ever that something, anything, was going on beneath the surface of those steady wins. Ethan watched the ticker screens beside his colleague Wang and called out in a measured tone, "The swings are pretty tame right now, perfect for someone riding a lucky streak. But don't be fooled by that little bump. It'll slide back before long. Keep an eye on it and be ready to pull out." Reassured by Ethan's assessment, Wang let his shoulders sag and, fighting a sudden wave of drowsiness, rested his head on the desk. He was snoring before Ethan could protest. Ethan glanced over with a twinge of envy. Fresh in the firm, he was determined to prove himself, and sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. He slapped his cheeks, rubbing his eyes to stay alert. 2 hours passed in near silence. Then a junior broker nearby began to sweat visibly, his hands trembling as he stared at the flashing numbers. He looked overwhelmed, as if about to make a desperate move. Alarmed, Ethan reached over and shook Wang's shoulder. "Wang, wake up! Something's off!" Wang stirred, blinking against the fog of sleep. What is it?" That's a serious situation. Ethan, the kid with the so-called good luck, just won nearly 10,000 game coins. Xiaozhou blurted, sweat beading on his forehead. What? Brother Wang sprang to his feet. 10,000 game coins? That's 1 million alliance coins. He ran the figures through his mind. At their salaries, earning 1 million alliance coins would take them decades. Admittedly, game coin trades in Net City routinely generated more than that in a single day, but if their department showed a loss of 1 million coins, the supervisor would tear them apart. Move, Brother Wang barked. Let's get down there and find out what's going on. Right away, Xiaozhou answered, scrambling to follow. Chapter 114, Catch 1. Ethan and his friends threaded their way through the crowds toward the Lucky Boy slot machines. Every console was jam-packed, voices buzzing with excitement and envy. In the center stood an unremarkable teenage boy, face blank, eyes locked on the spinning reels before him. He rested his hands lightly on the controls, feeding coins into the slot so infrequently it seemed the machine was practically on autopilot. Man, look at the haul he's got, someone murmured nearby. All small wins but non-stop. He's made more here in a few minutes than I do in a year, another whispered, tone equal parts awe and resentment. Sounds fishy, someone else grumbled. That payout rate's gotta be off the charts. Don't be ridiculous, came the reply. If the casino knew it was rigged, security'd be tearing it apart right now. Besides, that guy over there just hit another streak. Ethan leaned toward his friend Wang. Has anyone called for a technician? Could be a glitch. Wang shook his head, eyes fixed on the teenager. Ethan pushed forward, curiosity burning. At arm's length, he finally saw what everyone else had missed. The boy's hands, both of them, rested on the slot's surface, glowing unnaturally under the casino lights. Too flawless, too mechanical. The sight sent a chill through Ethan. This wasn't a lucky break. Whatever was happening here went far beyond chance. Ethan didn't stand a chance of scoring any small wins. I've checked it already. This machine was fully debugged first thing this morning. No problems, his companion murmured. But as the crowd around them grew thicker, the teenager's luck seemed to wane. Coin after coin went in, over 100, 200, 300, and still no prize. Kid, you're about spent. Why not cash out? It doesn't make sense to keep chasing it. A kindly, middle-aged man called out. Ethan didn't even look up. He dropped in yet another string of coins. 400, 500 now, and each time the slot clicked shut with nothing to show for it. Looks like his luck's finally run dry. Someone smacked their lips. Quiet, whispered another voice urgently. I want to see how far he goes. No one else dared interrupt. From the edge of the crowd, Brother Wang and a young man named Xiaozhou exchanged relieved glances. Ethan's streak was sputtering, and if he couldn't push past the 10,000 coin mark, they'd stay in the clear. Ethan sat at the Game City slot machine, heart pounding as he dropped virtual coin after virtual coin into its slot. By the time he'd pressed play for the 897th time without hitting the jackpot, he shook his head in resignation and rose to leave. In this arcade, once your on-screen credit balance reaches a certain threshold, the staff automatically transfer it onto a small branded memory card. No clinking tokens, no cash exchanged, so all he walked away with was that pale gray Game City card clipped to his fingers. Eyes followed him with a mix of envy and disbelief as he made his way to the redemption kiosk. The moment he stepped away, the slot machine's casing began to glow red-hot. A circle of veteran players gathered around, whispering theories. There's gotta be a glitch in that rig, one muttered. No one racks up that many credits fair and square. Another shook his head. Or maybe it's his technique, just hammering in coins without pausing. No strategy, just brute force. That clever style might have backfired for the house this time. Behind the counter, Satoshi Namu slid onto the operator's stool and stared anxiously at the exchange terminal. The memory card lay in front of him, waiting to be processed, and his fingers trembled as he tried to navigate the unfamiliar system. With a deep breath, he reached for the keyboard, determined to finalize Ethan's redemption. Ethan stared at the terminal, feeling completely out of his element. He wasn't used to navigating in-game shops on a computer. For a solid 5 minutes, he hovered his finger over the touchscreen, hesitating at every prompt. Finally, he managed to add his items, a pair of guard skill discs and a single high-toxicity skill disc to his virtual cart. Together, they cost 6,000 game coins. With a quick swipe, he confirmed the purchase. The system promptly converted the remaining 3,000 game coins in his account into alliance tokens. Straightening his jacket, Ethan stepped away from the terminal and headed for the counter. Two young clerks, Wang Jie and Xiao Ju, watched him through the glass partition, their expressions unreadable. He met their gazes for only a moment before looking away, refusing to let their silent scrutiny make him uncomfortable. A moment later, the door behind the counter slid open. A middle-aged attendant in a work smock emerged, carrying a small, unassuming box. He placed it carefully on the countertop and retreated back behind the glass. Wang Jie pushed the box and an unmarked bank card toward Ethan. "Here's your exchange," he said. His tone clipped. "This card has 357,500 credits loaded onto it. Please check." Ethan opened the box first. The 3 skill discs gleamed under the overhead lights, each one perfectly encased. Then he picked up the bank card, inspecting its matte black surface. Everything was exactly as promised. Behind the counter, Wang Jie's jaw twitched. He and Xiaoju had the authority to flag a transaction this large, but doing so would wipe out their entire monthly bonus. And in terms of raw value, Ethan's haul was easily equivalent to several years of their individual salaries. It was hard not to be jealous. Ethan tucked the discs into his bag and slipped the card into his pocket. With a curt nod, he turned and walked away, leaving the 2 clerks staring after him in a mixture of irritation and envy. Ethan nodded, lifted the box, and walked out of Game City without a word. He paid no attention to the curious stares or the hushed whispers of the tattooed youths grouped at the entrance. Just another crowd lingering to see what the city's latest winner would do next. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Ethan made his way down the street. A small, satisfied smile tugged at his lips. Since noon, he'd been navigating the bustling arcades of Manjin City's game district. On the surface, he was just another teenager feeding coins into the machines. In truth, he carried a discreet microchip that let him subtly influence each game's programming. From his previous life's experience, it was a simple matter to tilt the odds in his favor, just enough to accumulate wins without arousing suspicion. He deliberately interspersed losses among his victories to keep his play record convincing. As long as his total haul stayed below 1 million affinity coins, the city's administrators would never take notice. At worst, a few clerks might see a smaller bonus at the end of the day. But Ethan? He'd slip away completely unharmed, ready for whatever came next. Ethan had learned early on that in a city built on gambling, wins and losses were part of the deal. As long as the house maintained a steady, long-term profit, a bad day or two barely registered on the manager's radars. So when his alliance coin balance edged toward 1 million, he'd deliberately take a few losses, placate the shop clerks with his misfortune, then trade in the coins for the skill CDs he really needed, and slip away before suspicion could settle in. An occasional bankroll contribution was expected here. But if someone treated the casino like a daily ATM, no matter how perfect their human skin disguise, eventually their true identity would show. You can alter your face, but you can't hide your height or the look of your hands and feet. That's why Ethan only dropped by sporadically, using the place as a convenient exchange point. Acquire some free skill discs, pocket a bit of extra cash, and then disappear for weeks at a time. What a fortune, Ethan muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. He knew the sum he just walked away with would stoke envy, and might even drive a few desperate types to take reckless risks to snatch it. Still, he hadn't expected them to move so quick. Kalai. Barely had he stepped out of Game City when he felt it. The lightest pressure at his back, the subtle echo of someone mirroring his steps. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. 3 scruffy figures lingered just beyond the crowd's flow, their eyes fixed on him. These were the small-time predators who staked out the city's exits, waiting for freshly minted players to slip through. Their tracking was comically crude. Shuffling feet, nervous glances, the kind of amateur pantomime even a casual observer could spot. But Ethan wasn't any casual observer. As a former operative of the First World's elite rocket division, he'd learned to read these moves at a glance. Let them think they'd picked up his trail. With a half-smile, he veered into a narrow side street and broke into a brisk walk, forcing his pursuers to choose between betraying themselves or losing him altogether. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, Ethan would be long gone, and every coin just as safe as if it were stashed in the vaults of Game City itself. After all, patience and cunning always outmatch brute clumsiness, and in his book, that was the first rule of survival. Chapter 115, Hunt Reversal. Ethan exited Game City carrying the weight of today's winnings in his coat pocket. The neon lights flickered across his fatigued features, giving him the air of a lone, hopeless drifter, just the kind of mark a small syndicate from Manjin City would target. Over the past week, their street agents had scanned the casino floor for weak-looking but lucky gamblers, and Ethan fit the bill perfectly. Worse still, word had spread that he'd walked away with well over 1 million Alliance coins. From the shadows near the exit, 2 lookout men kept Ethan in their sights. They stayed hidden behind arcade machines and support columns, never coming within arm's length. Their orders were clear: no solo action. Their boss had made it plain that they might be small time, but they weren't fools. If their prey really was as lucky as the rumors suggested, they would need every advantage and every member of their gang to pull off a clean grab. As minutes ticked by, the lookouts tapped their radios with terse updates. "Target still moving," one whispered. "He's heading for the east exit." Farther down the corridor, the boss himself finally emerged, flanked by 3 bulkier underlings. Each man had been briefed. The moment Ethan stepped into the open, they would spring the trap. Ethan's stride faltered when he sensed the shift in atmosphere. The soft hum of the casino machines faded behind him, replaced by the low, tense chatter of anxious men waiting to pounce. He slowed to a cautious walk, a nagging chill crawling up his spine. The odds had favored him all night, until now. And as the gang closed in, the tables of fate were about to turn in a way none of them expected. Ethan led them exactly where they wanted, into the maze of Manjin City's twisting streets, yet unbeknownst to his pursuers, he was steering them straight into the deserted alleys of the old quarter. The narrow lanes were almost empty, perfect for what he had in mind. Behind him, the ragtag group of hunters followed in single file, each afraid their prize might slip away if they lost sight of him. With a casual flick, Ethan tossed a small, glossy orb, his super ball, into the air. In an instant, the raven he'd summoned materialized, landing on his shoulder with a soft caw. He'd replaced his face with a flawless human skin mask that concealed his features completely. There was no chance of recognition here, not with so few witnesses around. As the alley grew even quieter, the men trailing at the back grew restless. Impatient, some discarded their disguises and quickened their pace, determined not to let Ethan out of their sight. The click-clack of hurried footsteps drew closer, their aggression rising when they spotted the dark crow perched above him. Far from scaring them off, the bird only stoked their fury. What they didn't realize was how carefully Ethan measured each step. He led them on, controlling his pace so that, no matter how fast they closed in, he'd never give them the distance they craved. Ethan's lips curved into a triumphant smirk, and even the dark crow perched on his shoulder quivered with anticipation. Since their escape from Trial Island, he'd had no real chance to fight, and today, at last, his ravenous companion would get its fill of battle. Twilight deepened around them, and the dim glow of the alley's lanterns flickered unreliable shadows against the walls. The few stragglers who might have passed by had long since slipped away, leaving the winding streets deserted, perfect terrain for an ambush. Ethan glanced back at his crew, then nodded sharply. "Now," he whispered. At his signal, a handful of them burst into motion. Their footsteps pounded the cobblestones as they raced toward him. Sensing the onrush, Ethan pressed a small, rune-etched orb, his elven sphere, into the belt at his waist. In an instant, he surged forward, darting down a narrow side passage. "After me! Move it!" he called over his shoulder. Behind him, the gang's leader snarled as he realized they'd been spotted. He barked orders, and several lithe elves, some, one in a flash, sprang into pursuit, weaving through the shadows with uncanny speed. Ethan tucked his elbow in, lengthened his stride, and pushed harder. More than 2 weeks surviving the grueling trials on the island had thinned him out, but it had honed his reflexes to a razor's edge. With the crow cawing fiercely at his ear, he knew this chase was exactly what they'd both been craving. Ethan wasn't a muscle-bound powerhouse, but years of jungle survival had honed his body into a lean, tireless machine. Between his formal training and the daily scrapes with local street punks, he'd learned to move like a cheetah, slipping through narrow alleys, vanishing into the darkness until his pursuers fell hopelessly behind. Still, the men of the small Mansion City gang had home field advantage. They'd grown up winding through these streets and back lanes. Their knowledge of the city far outstripped Ethan's. Confident he couldn't slip away so easily, one of the lieutenants raised his voice. "Split up, 2 per team." "For backup," another added. It felt like overkill, sending pairs of grown men after a single teenager, but truly formidable young fighters were a rare commodity. At first, a few of the men hesitated, bristling at the extra precaution, but seconds later they fell into formation, pairing off and fanning out down the alleyways, flashlights cutting swaths through the night as the hunt for Ethan began in earnest. Unseen by his pursuers, the man they hunted now wore a black suit, melding perfectly with the dark alley. His icy eyes, devoid of any emotion, watched silently as the group dispersed. Ethan slowed his breathing, forcing every inhale and exhale to be soundless. Perched on his shoulder, the dark crow coiled its wings, ready to strike at a moment's notice. He savored this reversal of roles, hunter become hunted. Originally, the puppet army had strength in numbers. Common elves like Small Lotta, Big Needlebee, and Bobo were formidable when they fought together. But now they'd scattered, leaving no one to stand in his way. With his breath finally steady, Ethan eased out of the narrow side passage into the wider corridor. In the dim light, his own vision wavered, but the dark crow's night-seeing eyes missed nothing, guiding him forward without hesitation. From the shadows at his back, Ghost, a silent guardian who had been watching over Ethan, stepped into view. This tangle of alleyways was Ghost's domain, and he moved through it with inhuman grace. Before the two men searching for Ethan even realized his presence, he and Ghost closed the distance. The alley fell into an echoing stillness. Then the ambush began. Ethan waited in the alley's deepest shadow, flanked by his 2 silent allies, the spectral whisper he called Ghost, and the razor-taloned bird known as Dark Crow. At his signal, Ghost's voice slithered through the air, lulling the 2 human guards into a trance. Their eyes fluttered shut. They crumpled to the ground, fast asleep. Without missing a beat, Dark Crow struck. In a blur of feathers and beak, it unleashed a flurry of savage blows that cut down the ragtag band of elves in seconds. These street scoundrels had only substandard gear, stolen trinkets and faulty weapons, and no real training to speak of. They stood no chance against Dark Crow's lightning-fast assault. Ethan knelt beside the 2 motionless trainers. He lifted a hand to clamp their mouths shut, then drew the dagger he'd recovered on the trial island. Its blade glinted coldly in the dim light. With a single practiced motion, he slit their throats. Blood spattered his cloak, but Ethan merely wiped the crimson streaks on their tunics before rifling through their packs. They carried nothing of true value, just a few junk-space trinkets, yet he tucked them away anyway. A little gain was better than none. He cast one last glance over the fallen elves. "If you decide to cross me," he murmured, voice low and deadly, "be prepared to die for it." They had chosen deceit and inferior wares. Now they lay silenced. Sheathing his dagger, Ethan melted back his leg and to the darkness alongside Dark Crow and Ghost. There would be no pause tonight. The hunt had only just begun. "I'd be glad to help, but I'll need the actual chapter text to rewrite. Could you please paste the machine-translated chapter you'd like me to polish and adapt?" Chapter 16, Massacre. The old city's winding alleys stretched before them like a living maze. By design, its narrow lanes would quickly dissipate even the faintest hint of blood in the night air, but Ethan paid that detail no mind. With Dark Crow's night vision goggles guiding his steps and the Ghost slipping through the shadows at his command, he picked off 2 sentries before they even realized they'd been marked. He pressed deeper into the darkness, counting silently as each life ended. 4, 6, 8. 13 had been his original tally. Now only 5 remained alive. At that moment, the metallic tang of blood finally coated the air, drifting down every passage until it reached the ears of the survivors. Alarm flickered across their faces, but only for a heartbeat, too late. By flashlight codes and hand signals, their leader herded the survivors into a tight cluster beneath a lone lamp, their bravado crumbling into panic. 5 figures stared into swallowing blackness, fear sharpening every line on their faces. Only their boss remained unshakably composed. Once a mere foot soldier in one of Manjin City's greatest gangs, he wore his calm like armor. Even now, he stood straight-shouldered, lips pressed in a thin line, as if daring Ethan to step into the light. Ethan paused a moment, listening to the whisper of hidden blades and the soft shuffle of frightened boots. Then, without a word, he let the ghosts slip forward. The massacre would be over before the city even smelled the first drop of blood. Ethan had lost the bid for power in Manjin's underworld, and in the aftermath, he scraped together a ragtag crew of street toughs just to keep his head above water. Though he was the biggest guy around, he knew better than to underestimate the hidden prodigies who lurked in the city's shadows, young phenoms whose strength could outmatch brute force. So he moved with caution, never stirring up more trouble than he could handle. That very caution was the only reason he'd survived this long in Manjin. Tonight, though, his luck ran out. They'd cornered a mark in a narrow alley and things had gone sideways. One man ended up dead. "Boss," whispered Jin, the bravest of Ethan's lieutenants, voice shaking in the neon gloom, "I think we really stepped on some iron plates this time." The others pressed in closer, faces drained of color, eyes fixed on Ethan. They needed direction, and they were terrified of the fallout. Ethan gritted his teeth, the anger and fear warring in his chest. "Damn," he spat. "We've killed someone, and whoever they were, they've got connections. We can't stay here." He took a steadying breath. "From now on, we split up. No more 5-man squads prowling the old city. We lie low out beyond the walls, lay low until this blows over. Understood?" Each man nodded, the gravity of their situation sinking in. There was no turning back. They had to vanish, or face the wrath of forces far stronger than any street gang. "As long as we make it to a crowded place, he won't dare follow us," one of them hissed, urgency lacing his voice. Inside, Ethan's fury roared. Every instinct told him to charge out and confront them right away, but cold reason reminded him that their only weapons were rotten tomatoes and smelly eggs, hardly a match for him. He watched them edge away from the winding alleys of Qingshan, reluctant to leave the old city's shadows, yet forced to retreat. If they truly pulled back, it would only be on Ethan's terms. Hidden in the darkness, Ethan had tracked their final patrol of 5. He'd come guided by phantom allies he called crows and ghosts, silent scouts that left no trace. Through a crack in a ruined wall, he overheard their radioed chatter. A mocking smile curled at his lips. "You're the ones provoking me," he whispered. "Now you can't run. Once you cross that line, death is your only escape." Ethan hovered just out of sight, neither too close to spook them nor too far to lose them. Their guard was at its highest now. Any rash move would alert them. He'd wait for the moment they slackened, then strike them without warning. They slipped westward, moving slowly under the cover of half-lit streets, eyes darting to every rooftop and alley. 10 tense minutes crawled by until the last battered archway of the old city appeared. Beyond it lay the neon glow of the modern district, its bright lights a promise of safety. As the 5 drew near the threshold, neither side suspected how close betrayal and vengeance truly were. Ethan watched from the shadows as the small band of 5 stumbled into the narrow alley. One of them, a young man with trembling shoulders, exhaled so loudly that Ethan could almost hear the relief in his breath. "Thank God, we're almost out," the youth murmured, wiping sweat from his brow. "Let's never come back here." Behind him, the others nodded in agreement. They picked up their pace, convinced this last stretch would lead them safely out of the city's darkest quarter. For a moment, their fear gave way to hope, and that was precisely when Ethan struck. He raised a hand and the night around him shivered. "Phantom, hypnosis," he ordered in a low, decisive voice. "Dark Crow, flank the leader. Keep him from firing." A rasping chuckle answered him. In an instant, the ghostly figure Ethan called Phantom accelerated in swirling shadows, materializing before the 5 just as they rounded a corner. Its eyes glowed with unnatural light. At Ethan's command, it unleashed its hypnosis, targeting each of the terrified survivors. They froze, mid-step, jaws dropping as a sudden drowsiness swept through their limbs. The leader reached for his pistol, only to feel an unbearable weight pressing down on his eyelids. One by one, their bodies betrayed them, heads bowed, and their limbs went slack. Simultaneously, a huge black crow swooped in, talons extended, aiming straight for the young man clutching the gun. The leader's fingers trembled so fiercely he couldn't even pull the trigger. In that charged silence, broken only by the distant hum of the city, Ethan stepped out of the darkness, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. The trap had worked perfectly. The alley, once a beacon of hope, had become their prison. And Ethan's night was just beginning. Ethan never even saw it coming. One moment he'd been focused on the ritual circle. The next, Commander Wu of the Five charged forward, too late to stop the ambush. A harsh crack echoed as the dark crow's beak sank into Wu's tongue, and the agony snapped him out of the trance the creature had woven around him. Ethan jerked awake to frantic movement. He rolled aside just in time to evade a sweeping strike of the crow's ebony wing. The bird didn't pursue him, though. Instead, it flitted over to the 3 elven sentries defending the circle. With a sudden beat of its wings, it scattered them like leaves in a gale. Snarling indignantly, the crow fixed its hypnotic gaze on Commander Wu's elven ward. Though the beast was smaller and less muscular than an elf, it twisted its talons around the glowing silver breastplate and dug in, proving that even the fleet-footed elf could find himself pinned down by darkness. On the ground, Wu writhed and moaned, clutching his tongue. Blood trickled through his fingers, but he refused to yield. At that moment, Ethan bit back his rising panic and forced himself to focus. Ignoring the dull roar of pain in his own head, he scraped his hand over his belt and seized the small crystalline orb carved with ancient elven runes. "Hold on," he whispered, slipping the orb free. Even as the crow let out a guttural caw of triumph, Ethan pressed the artifact against his palm and called upon every ounce of willpower he possessed. The orb flared to life in his grip, its pale light cutting through the twilight that the dark creature had summoned, and setting the stage for the next fierce clash. Smack! What? A foot crashed down from the sky, pinning Ethan's hand to the ground. He looked up and saw the young man who'd been silent moments ago. Gone was any trace of that vacant expression. Now his eyes were cold, razor-sharp, as if sizing Ethan up like prey. The prez, sure from the boot, felt like iron clamps crushing his bones. He couldn't move, no matter how hard he tried. Dark Raven, deal with that elf first. At Ethan's command, the Dark Raven leapt into the battle against Guisi. Under the elves' combined assault, the giant needle bee demon collapsed without a sound. The boss, furious that his ally still lived yet couldn't fight back, let a savage light flare in his eyes. With one hand, he drew a long dagger and slashed toward Ethan's foot. But Ethan was quicker. He had anticipated the strike. With his right dagger, he deflected the boss's blow, and with his left, he drove his blade in with deadly precision. The boss howled, staggered back, and his dagger clattered to the ground. Ethan crouched low, his gaze locked on the fallen elf's eyes. Coldly, he whispered, "In your next life, don't pick a fight you can't win." With that, he yanked the dagger free from the elf's arm, and in a single fluid motion, slit his throat. When the body went still, Ethan gave it a contemptuous kick. He unfastened the elf's belt, swept all the elven coins and charms into his pockets, then retrieved the boss's dimension ring and transferred every valuable artifact inside. He straightened, sneering at the corpse. Despite his scorn for these foolish elves, their leader had proven a profitable target. Pockets and ring now heavy with loot, Ethan slipped into the shadows, already plotting his next move. If you enjoyed this chapter, please bookmark and recommend. Chapter 117, Pintail Scorpion Hatching. When Ethan reappeared on the streets of Manjin that night, he was already wearing his standard Alliance cover, one of several identities he kept at the ready. By compartmentalizing his persona, he could slip in and out of dangerous situations without leaving a trace. During his last escapade, for example, he'd assumed the form of a street urchin. No one could have linked that ragged child back to Ethan's true body, even if they'd tried. Manjin by night outshone its daytime bustle. The city lights mingled with a sky dusted in stars, painting the streets in soft, glimmering hues. Ethan felt utterly untroubled by the recent violence he'd been part of. He'd been here before, in past lives, and knew all too well how bloodshed became routine. With practiced confidence, he located the underground bazaar and unloaded his latest prize, an elf egg and its strange companion, the so-called elf ball. The vendors, hungry for exotic wares, paid him a solid 80,000 alliance coins. Word was that the fiercest of the pintail scorpions had already been wiped out by the Dark Crow operatives and their ghost detachment, leaving only the weaker young to trade. Even so, Ethan felt no regret. 80,000 coins was more than enough to fund his next move. Ethan paused to reflect on why the Hunters Guild wouldn't honor bounties for wild creatures like the ones I'd trained myself. Simple. The guild answers only to the untamed wilderness, and any beasts forged by outsiders don't qualify. I didn't linger in the black market, kept my head down, caused no trouble, and once the elves changed hands, I took my payment and stocked up on everything I'd need. Antidotes, wound balms, the lot. Stepping back into the night, the moon hung low and silver in a nearly empty street. I spotted a classy hotel just across the way and, figure it was worth it, dropped 3,000 yuan on a top-floor luxury suite. It wasn't like I felt guilty. This was stolen money all the same, and the world owed me a little splurge. The room turned out to be enormous, easily big enough for the elves to run through some of the more demanding drills I had in mind. I'd already eaten before heading to the black market, a habit I share with Dark Crow, my battle companion. We both function best when we've got a full belly. After dispatching a few pesky nuisances down there, dinner tasted all the richer. And after that long stretch of tense negotiations and hidden trades, Dark Crow was practically buzzing with the thrill of the fight. He prowled the suite, feathers ruffling, eager for the next challenge. I couldn't help but grin. That familiar hunger in his eyes told me we were both ready for whatever came next. Ethan felt a twinge of guilt as he glanced at the beasts huddled behind him, harmless and utterly useless in a fight. He stepped into the empty room, bolted the door with a solid click, and watched silently as Guisi padded around the perimeter, nose to the ground, ensuring there were no unwelcome surprises. Tomorrow, they'd be on the road out of Mankin City for Kaji City. Earlier today, Ethan had slipped into the black market, tracked down a reliable information broker, and picked up a small cadre of Nidalang scouts. The pay on a rookie hunter contract wasn't impressive, but experience would bring greater rewards in time. Right now, all that mattered was leveling up. Dropping onto the threadbare sofa, Ethan let his mind wander over possible routes and safe houses. A moment's peace, at least, before the next move. Then Guisi's low, gravelly growl shattered the quiet. "What is it?" Ethan sprang to his feet and swept his gaze over the dim corners of the room. A dry, echoing chuckle filled the air, and to his astonishment, Guisi's form dissolved into the shadows wrapped around Ethan's legs. No way! Ethan's heart raced as he realized what was happening. Almost instantly, a smoky hand emerged from beneath his feet, pulling Guisi back into solidity, and in that ghostly paw was an incubator, its glass surface wreathed in curling tender ills of dark mist. Guisi's eyes gleamed with an uncanny intelligence, as though it held some revelation Ethan was only just beginning to understand. When Aya set the incubator on the stone plinth, Ethan's eyes lit up. Clamptail scorpion. Inside the clear chamber lay the scorpion-tailed egg he'd wrested from the spirit. Above it, a digital display counted down, 5 minutes to hatching. The moment the beasts and the dark-feathered crows registered the change in the egg's aura, they clamored in excitement, surging closer to watch. In our troop, the first hatchling is always the smallest, and every new companion brings a pause in training and a burst of celebration. Today we were a party of 6. Ethan, Aya, 4 wood elves, and our 4 spirit beasts, all fixated on that incubator. Of them, the great wolf Arcan was most keenly attuned to the egg's life force. He lowered his head, closed his eyes, and pressed his muzzle against the cold glass, feeling each heartbeat like throb of energy pulsing within. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the countdown edged closer to 0. Then, at last, the timer hit 00. With a soft hiss, the dome of the incubator began to lift. The egg floated free in midair, wreathed in a faint lavender mist that curled and shimmered. Suddenly, the egg quivered violently, as though the creature inside were struggling to burst forth. Every eye in the circle widened at the display of raw, surging vitality. 5 minutes of waiting had led to this single, trembling moment of anticipation. Crack! A thin fissure snakes across the surface of the elven egg. The dense purple mist that has coiled around it surges into the gap like water through a crack in a dam. Encouraged by the mist's force, the fracture widens with sharp, echoing clicks until, pop! Pieces of shell scatter, and from the broken husk emerges a tiny creature bathed in shifting shades of blue and violet. He's no bigger than Ethan's palm. Brilliant sapphire eyes lock onto Ethan's with a mixture of trust, wonder, and a hint of playful curiosity. His lithe body is half tail, a sleek scorpion-like appendage that curves behind him, and above his head 2 delicate white pincers wave tentatively, as if reaching out for a hug. Ethan's breath catches in his throat, and his heart soars at the sight. With a gentle smile, he holds out an open hand. The little elf scorpion pauses, glancing from Ethan's face to the welcoming palm. Then, with a tiny chirp of delight, he leaps forward and settles into Ethan's hand, curling his tail in happy contentment. "Welcome to the world," Ethan whispers, stroking the creature's back. The newborn waggles his pincers in agreement, ready at last to explore the wonders around him. Ethan pulled a freshly drawn bottle of milk from the large storage tank and fitted a tiny straw into its neck. He set it in front of the newly hatched scorpion-tailed creature and offered, "Try this. I think you'll like it." Having just broken free of its shell, the little scorpion eyed the straw with curiosity. It crept forward, gave the milk a tentative sniff, then its eyes lit up. With surprising agility, it latched onto the bottle and began slurping eagerly. The milk tasted even better than it smelled, and soon the hatchling was hoisting the bottle with both pincers, draining hefty mouthfuls that must have weighed more than it did. Every few seconds it emitted delighted chirps, clearly savoring each drop. While the scorpion happily drank, Ethan activated his biometric scanner chip. A soft hum rose from the device as it began recording the creature's vital signs and genetic markers, capturing data on its growth rate, health indicators, and unique tail morphology. As the milk level dipped lower, Ethan made a mental note of how quickly the scorpion consumed it. This promising specimen might just become his most valuable discovery yet. The interface blinked to life, displaying the newly acquired puppet elf's stats. Name: tongue scorpion, light cyan. Type: puppet elf. Gender: male. Level 1 attributes: toxic insect S. Specialty: sniper-equipped items, none. Genetic skills: rugged constitution, high-speed movement, venomous tail, relentless pursuit. Basic abilities: bite, poison needle, intimidating stare. Taught skills: insect bite, precision shot. Current skill learner: Ethan's eyes lit up the moment he read specialty sniper. He hadn't anticipated that this scorpion-tailed puppet would lean toward long-range precision, but the synergy was perfect. With its toxic attributes and inherent agility, Tongue Scorpion promised to become a formidable marksman, exactly the direction Ethan had been aiming for. Chapter 118, Growth Direction. Ethan studied his new creature's attributes with growing excitement. Its special trait, Sniper, meant that every critical hit would further amplify its damage. If he could track down an accessory to boost its critical rate, this Force Scorpion, also known as the Dragon King Scorpion, would become Ethan's deadliest burst damage unit. That was especially true against attribute-restricted elves. A well-placed crit against foes within 5 levels of the Scorpion would all but guarantee a one-hit takedown. Even more surprising was the hatchling's quick mastery of 2 valuable skills upon emergence: Insect Bite and Acid Spit. Clearly, this claw-tailed scorpion was a prodigy. Its sky blue rank stood as the highest grade among all of Ethan's elven summons, and even a single-tier advantage translated to a significant edge in combat power at the same level. As the scorpion unfurled its pincers, Dark Crow and the foolish beasts gathered around in awe. Each wanted to reach out and stroke the little creature's carapace, yet none dared, fearful of squeezing too hard. Watching their tentative, wide-eyed curiosity, Ethan couldn't suppress a smile. This tiny scorpion was destined to grow into something extraordinary. Ethan placed his hand gently against the tiny scorpion-tailed scorpion's shell to demonstrate its texture. Freshly hatched, the carapace was still soft and slightly rough under his fingers. Encouraged by his example, the other apprentices reached out hesitantly to feel it for themselves, but the little creature was far more interested in its feeding than in their curious touches. Before long, the bottle of milk lay empty. Satisfied, the hatchling coiled its tail, scuttled up Ethan's arm, and wound its way to his collarbone. There, it pressed its head against his neck in a gentle nuzzle and promptly fell asleep, its miniature claws digging into the fabric of his shirt. Thanks to the tiny barbs on its pincers, it wouldn't budge, even if Ethan broke into a run. With one last admiring glance, the apprentices turned back to their basic drills. After all, their new companion was still a newborn, a delicate infant destined to spend most of its time asleep. Ethan had no intention of confining such a fragile creature inside a wizard sphere just yet. Ethan eyed the tiny scorpion curled on his shoulder. It was still so small and completely motionless that most people passed by without even noticing it was alive. Before its evolution into a Dragon King scorpion, its essence lay in poison and insect magic. Afterward, it combined poison with darker energies. Though its type had shifted, none of its insect-based skills were lost. In fact, the evolution only amplified its offensive power. In the broader mechanics of their world, insect techniques strike hardest against grass, poison, and dark magics. Poison abilities overwhelm grass and fairy arts, and dark powers wreak havoc on ghost and psychic forces. While some of these strengths overlap, there's no denying the raw destructive potential of arachnid magic. Poison in particular ranks among the top 3 most dangerous affinities across all the elven realms. And unlike in the games of old, elven warriors here can channel toxins through their bodies at will, spitting out corrosive acids, conjuring paralyzing venoms, and unleashing any manner of deadly poison they desire. Chapter title: Survival. When you venture into the wilderness, few foes are more insidious than venomous elves. At first glance, their bites or scratches may seem less dramatic than searing burns, crippling paralysis, or bone-freezing cold. There's no immediate agony, no sudden collapse, but that's precisely what makes them so dangerous. Their toxins creep through the victim's bloodstream hour by hour, sapping strength, clouding judgment, and eventually threatening organ failure, shock, even death. Elves, by nature, possess extraordinary resilience. They shrug off blunt force and endure flames, ice, or lightning with little more than bruises. But toxins are a different matter. Like acid-eating weigh at steel, these poisons erode from the inside out. Humans, fragile by comparison, stand almost no chance without prompt treatment. That's why Ethan never sets foot beyond the safe zones without a full supply of antidotes strapped to his belt. He's learned the hard way that even the strongest tonic can only neutralize certain strains. When an elf's venom evolves in tandem with their organs, melding dark magic and biology into something utterly new, no known cure will suffice. To prepare, Ethan studies every fragment of elven toxicology he can find, which glands secrete the most potent formulas, how an elf's toxic system amalgamates magical energy with bodily fluids, and which antidote counteracts which molecular structure. Even then, he accepts that some encounters will push him to his limits. But caution and knowledge are his greatest weapons. With his antidote satchels secured and his wits sharpened, he steps into the forest, ready to face whatever hidden dangers lie beyond the trees. Though the scorpion-tailed scorpion had only just hatched, it already carried the purple toxic energy that had seeped through the cracks of the elven egg. That energy was pure venom, so from the moment it emerged, the little scorpion was inherently poisonous. Don't be fooled by its youth. Because it has yet to fire a single toxin, the venom is allowed to build and evolve within its body. Over time, that stored power will crystallize into a fully developed poison sac, unleashing the true horror of a venomous elf scorpion. Ethan studied the creature's instincts and realized it wasn't cut out for the slow, draining tactics of a plague-wielding specialist. Instead, its strength lay in delivering a single, devastating strike, an instantaneous burst of lethal poison. If a ghost-type fighter thrives on consumptive diseases that erode an enemy's defenses over time, then this forceps-tailed scorpion would be the Cobra King of toxic eruptions. Determined to amplify its destructive potential, Ethan resolved to seek out volatile, high-grade poisons and feed them to the scorpion. By infusing its growing venom reserves with these potent compounds, he would ensure that, when the time came, the scorpion's deadly sting would strike with unparalleled force. Ethan tightened his control over the young scorpion's venom supply, using its poison sparingly until the sac had fully condensed. Once it evolved into a Dragon King scorpion, it would master a host of energy attacks and even unlock the legendary Triple Fang techniques, making its offense terrifyingly well-rounded. With such a massive venom reservoir, he was confident the claw-tailed scorpion could race through its juvenile phase. The real work, he knew, would begin only when it entered the growth period. He glanced over at the 4 elemental spirits, still crackling with energy after the scorpion's incubation. They moved through their drills in perfect unison, each gesture honing their power. Ethan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He filed away the scorpion's development timetable in his mind. After all, he'd spent a lifetime training claw-tailed scorpions and knew exactly how to pace their progress. With that settled, Ethan withdrew the superpower training manual Nagsy had given him. He'd studied it more times than he could count, yet each read-through revealed fresh insights. Even the simplest passages could be unpacked from new angles, yielding strategies he'd never noticed before. Settling back to study, he prepared himself for the next stage of both his own growth and his scorpion's. Ethan flipped through the booklet with growing admiration. Whoever had written this had hidden something within its pages, but the booklet was incomplete. He paused, sensing a subtle shift in his mind. "Chip, how's the Rapid Superpower Advancement Protocol coming along? What's the current progress?" A mechanical voice chimed inside his skull. "Due to the expanded database, parsing time has increased. Estimated completion 6 hours, 31 minutes, 42 seconds. Ethan frowned. Since the breeding facility's data had been added, the workload had ballooned, and the analysis was running behind schedule. He closed his eyes and took a steadying breath. By tomorrow morning, he told himself, the results would be ready. Chapter 119, Peak Elves. Dawn was just breaking over the suburbs north of Manjin City when Ethan emerged from the tree line. He wore a plain league trainer's uniform and carried only a map in one hand. At his side padded a small, pale pink creature, its rounded ears twitching with every rustle of leaves, and perched on his shoulder was a bright blue companion, eyes keen and watchful. A third, even tinier being, a delicate purple creature with elfin features you might easily overlook, stood on a nearby rock, scanning the undergrowth. Ethan had slipped out of Manjin City before the first light of morning, determined to track down Nidolang. Yesterday, in the black market's shadows, he'd traded for a crude but promising map marked with several small circles, areas where Nidolang was rumored to appear. The informant's intel wasn't infallible, but it was better than wandering blindly through the jungle. Now the first circled location lay before him, a steep hillside draped in thick vines and towering old-growth trees. Ethan followed the map's directions without hesitation, pushing through ferns and clinging vines. The climb was unrelenting. Nearly an hour passed before he finally crested the ridge. But after surviving the brutal trials of the island, this jungle was little more than a gentle grove. He paused to catch his breath, glanced at his 3 companions, and steeled himself for whatever lay ahead. Ethan pressed deeper into the forest, where signs of human activity all but vanished, and the power level of the local elves climbed, though, fortunately, they still ranked within beast-tier strength. "It has to be here somewhere," he muttered. "Dark Raven, see if you can pick up any trace of the Nidoran." With a practiced flick of his wrist, he released his super raven, a spirit bird whose keen eyes could scour the canopy and forest floor for miles. There were barely any passers-by this deep in the woods, certainly no elves to raise an alarm. A sharp cry split the air as the raven beat its wings once, then transformed into a streak of living shadow and vanished from view. Ethan watched its silhouette dissipate among the treetops and let his thoughts drift. That morning, he'd finished the chip's task analysis. Hidden in its database were rapid boost techniques for mental prowess and supernatural power, if only he could trust the bizarre names of those artifacts to be real. He'd never heard of most of them before, the sole exception being a single prop called the meditation bead. Ethan had heard rumors of a device that could dramatically speed up and enhance superpower meditation. Whether it actually existed or delivered on its promise was still anyone's guess. After all, the chip's database merely cataloged every rumor it picked up. It didn't analyze feasibility or effectiveness. Even if some entries were flagged as dubious, Ethan couldn't be completely sure they were false. More than once, he'd wondered if he'd somehow missed his chance to awaken junior-level superpowers. If he'd never developed any ability at all, his life might have been simpler, if far less extraordinary. Instead, he'd manifested a rare gift only to find himself stuck at a rookie's rank. Every time he thought about it, that frustration twisted at him anew. But that was human nature. When something feels utterly out of reach, you can admire it from a distance without guilt. The moment a real opportunity appears, though, desire takes hold. What if I could claim that power? What might I do with it? Caught between skepticism and longing, Ethan realized this wasn't about experience or training. It was simply what it meant to be human. After a short break, Ethan resumed his ascent up the hillside, the sluggish beast plodding faithfully at his side. The dark crow had yet to return, but its absence didn't slow his exploration. He wasn't dependent on Nitolin's help to capture creatures. If he stumbled across any particularly rare or high-grade elves, he'd seize the opportunity himself. After all, they were all sources of income. As they climbed, Ethan noticed the levels of the wild elves shifting dramatically. At the foot of the hill, most hovered around level 13 to 14, but higher up, creatures suddenly ranged between level 18 and 19, and he even spotted one or two at level 20. Unfortunately, these higher-level elves tended to be of poorer quality. Fewer of them met the top-tier qualifications he'd grown accustomed to on the trial island. In practical terms, the jump in level didn't translate into better rewards for the sluggish beast. Deciding it was time to bolster his offense, Ethan summoned his ghosts into the fray. Of all his summoned allies, Menguisi still ranked lowest in experience. Even so, every bit of help counted when tackling these unpredictable hillsides. Ethan adjusted his strategy. He'd increased the number of encounters to accelerate Ghastly's growth. After all, Ghastly wouldn't show its true combat potential until it evolved, and evolution required experience. The trade-off, of course, was that their overall pace slowed. When they finally reached the foot of the mountain, Murkrow returned to Ethan's shoulder, while Firo remained perched on the other. Murkrow gave a firm shake of its head, letting Ethan know it hadn't picked up any trace of Nidoran in the area. "That's fine," Ethan said with a shrug. "We'll just call it training." He reached into his belt pouch, pulled out an advanced energy block, and offered it to Murkrow. The Dark-type Pokémon accepted eagerly. Although Murkrow hadn't spotted even a single Nidoran, that didn't mean none were hiding nearby. Just that one quick flight around the clearing wasn't enough to detect creatures concealed in caves or thick grass. With renewed momentum, Ethan moved forward. Now that Murkrow had joined his battling squad, the pair's coordination, Murkrow's aerial dives and Firo's powerful wing strikes, overwhelmed every wild Pokémon they encountered. None could withstand the two-pronged assault. Meanwhile, Ghastly followed close behind, using every skirmish as an opportunity to practice its interference moves and sharpen its skills. By the time they reached the rocky foothills, Ethan was confident. Not only was Ghastly growing stronger with each fight, but the whole team was learning to work together more effectively. They still hadn't found any sign of Nidoran, but today's battles had been well worth the effort. On the slopes of Laoshan, elf clans intermingled rather than maintaining rigid territories as they did on Trial Island. Scraps over resources were rare, and none of the wild elves here had earned a reputation for great strength. True to form, Ghost couldn't resist picking a fight. He taunted a band of grim-faced elves until their numbers overwhelmed him, only to be rescued and to secure his revenge by Ethan's two older brothers. Ethan said little. Mischief was Ghost's nature, and frankly, he found the boys' antics more entertaining than troublesome. But as they pushed higher up the mountain, elf sightings dwindled until they reached silent stretches of wilderness where none roamed. Ethan paused on a rocky ledge and studied the treeless rise ahead. There must be something powerful at the summit, either a lone, formidable wild elf, or perhaps an entire clan hiding up there, he murmured. Dark crows and the sluggish fool beasts felt it too. More sensitive to ambient magic than any of the humans, they stiffened under the unseen pressure growing stronger with every step. Ethan's own senses tingled. A surge of energy welled up inside him, thrilling and unnerving all at once. Whatever lay ahead, it was no ordinary elf. Although our recent skirmishes along the road had been entertaining, the enemies we faced were simply too weak to give us any real sense of accomplishment. Only this formidable elf before us had genuinely captured our interest. I wasn't worried, the world wasn't on the brink of collapse, and even the ghosts hovering around us cheered at the prospect of a worthy challenge. Ethan smiled as he took in our eager faces. "Since you all want a proper fight," he said, "let's restore our strength first, then we'll face him at full power." Chapter 120. Abbott. The logistics team finally returned, bearing fresh, high-quality milk for Dark Crow and the foolish beasts, along with advanced energy blocks. With these supplies, they'd soon reach the peak of their strength. "All right, we've rested long enough. Let's go deal with that earth serpent," Ethan said with a grin, brushing the dust from his trousers. "Gah!" Dark Crow squawked enthusiastically. "Yeah!" The foolish beasts roared in agreement. Greasy stayed silent, but bristled with anticipation. He knew better than to challenge an elf head-on, yet he couldn't hide his excitement for the coming battle. The towering milk tank, however, kept her distance. She wouldn't let anyone bother her, and she'd never make the first move anyway. Since Ethan hadn't asked her to join the fight, she simply stood off to the side, watching her companions gear up. They pressed on toward the summit. Where the trail had been choked with trees, the peak was surprisingly open. Tall pines stood far apart, and not a single wild elf was in sight. At the summit of Laoshan Mountain stood a single colossal tree, its trunk wreathed in a faint purple aura. There, stretched out on a broad branch, lay a massive serpent, lazily flicking venom-like script into the air as it basked in the morning sun. Something snapped in the air, and Ethan's silhouette drifted into view. The snake's head lifted slowly, and the two enormous eyes on its underbelly swung fully open. With renewed vigor, it spat out lines of hissing script faster and faster, its narrow pupils fixed on Ethan with an icy stare, though every so often they glowed with predatory heat. Strange. This serpent had claimed the summit as its realm for who knew how long. Only the boldest creatures ever dared to approach. Yet here Ethan was, boldly entering its domain. Long ago, before it was driven from its former territory, this very snake had slithered among humans. It recognized the shape of a two-legged creature all too well, not through fond memories, but for a far darker reason. Humans were its favorite prey. This was, after all, a man-eating serpent. Ethan felt his heart pound as those belly eyes bore into him, but he merely lifted an eyebrow. A display meant to intimidate? Such theatrics held little sway over the dark ravens. Though intimidate can sap some of an opponent's attack power, it does nothing to quell their burning will to fight. A purple-scaled apagua slithered down the broad trunk, its scales rasping against the bark with every inch it descended. Each rasping scrape echoed in the still air, punctuated by the creature's heavy, measured breaths as it drew closer. The moment Apagua entered the chip's scanning range, data flashed across Ethan's display. Species: Abbott, light green. Gender: male level 23. Type poison. Ability: intimidate. Held item: none. Genetic moves: poisonous, fang, poison tail. Basic moves: crush, ice fang, thunder fang, fire fang, bind, leer, poison sting, glare, strangle. Acid TM moves: acid spray, wrap, snatch. Tutor moves: none. Ethan's eyes brightened at the sight of a light green Abbott. It wasn't that he intended to capture the beast right away, far from it. From the way Apagua's eyes burned with predatory hunger, it was obvious the snake had devoured its share of prey. That sort of temperamental power was more like a ticking time bomb than a steadfast companion. Ethan made a mental note. This was one creature he didn't want lingering by his side for long. Though Ethan had no qualms about killing, he still recoiled at the notion of elf cannibalism. The creature before him carried itself with such imperious pride, like a monarch who'd ruled these woods for centuries, that Ethan knew bringing it down would be no small feat. He wasn't itching for a pointless brawl. His interest was strictly professional. A wild spirit of this caliber would be priceless to the Hunters Guild. He whistled sharply. "Ground serpent! Dark crow! Brute! Attack!" At his command, 22 beasts surged forward as one. Out in the wilderness, Hayd learned that courtesy never slowed you down. One-on-one duels were a luxury they couldn't afford. This kind of coordinated ferocity was exactly what the Alliance's breeding programs were designed to produce. A lone hunter might slaughter an ordinary foe in a single clean strike, but when you faced an equal, you came away bruised and bloodied before you even tasted victory. Some might label it unfair, but in these lands, survival of the fittest was the only law that mattered. Strength in numbers ruled supreme. Without allies like these, no tribe could ever seize and hold its territory. Ethan watched Aber surge forward, closing in on his two summoned allies, the mindless beast and the dark crow. Each creature specialized in a different power, Aber's brute strength versus the beast's raw superpower ability and the crow's swift aerial strikes. Beast, unleash mental shock. Crow, wrap your wings in the wind's blessing and attack. Ethan barked. Instantly, the mindless beast emitted a powerful spiritual wave. Though invisible to the eye, it rippled through the air, warping the space around Aber's head. A sharp cry echoed as Aber reeled, clutching his skull. Seizing the opening, the dark crow, its feathers now aglow with white windlight, dove at Aber's snake-like head. With a thunderous crack, its wings struck home. Aber was blasted backward, tumbling 3 meters through the air. The viper's toughest armor lay in that coiled crown of scales, yet even that formidable plating couldn't withstand the crow's enhanced strike. Though the blow left Aber wounded, it shattered the daze left by the beast's mental assault, and he drew a ragged breath, snapping back to awareness. Ethan's eyes narrowed as the massive mouth of the blood bowl gaped open, unleashing a foul, rotting stench. In an instant, a volley of purple poison needles spat outward, each dart aimed dead on at the dark raven. With a piercing screech, the raven twisted midair, its ebony wings slicing the projectiles aside like a razor. No sooner had it avoided the attack than the monstrous Abby leapt in close. Like iron shackles, its sinewy limbs coiled around the raven, squeezing with brutal force. Few beings could endure such raw strength. Any caught in those grips would have been crushed or turned into a mindless husk. Dark Raven, dodge that final dart and strike with Shadow Surge, Ethan barked. The raven banked sharply and unfurled its wings, evading the last needle. Dark energy crackled at its talons as it prepared its counterattack. Beasts, focus your telepathy. Restrain him. Ghosts, ready Nightfall's shade. A wave of psychic force pulsed from the dumb beasts, and the dual restraints of Ethan's super ability system hammered Abby with searing pain. The creature staggered under the onslaught, its advance grinding to a halt. At the same moment, the raven unleashed Shadow Surge, a rippling wave of inky darkness that slammed into Abby's flank, sending it reeling. Now, ghosts, Nightfall's shade, Ethan commanded. Silvery apparitions materialized in a flicker of moonlight. Each wraith sent forth a precise bolt of fixed spectral energy, searing Abby's flesh with unearthly power. The monster's roar faltered, the Nightfall's shade leaving scorching trails of shadow in its wake. In this game world, skills lose power whenever there's a big level gap between attacker and target. No matter how flashy the animation, the damage simply won't scale. Heh! Geezy crowed as he leapt forward to back up his older brothers. His wicked laughter rang out just as the abbot monster finally came to its senses. Facing foes this strong and impressively coordinated was bad enough, but the pink-robed elf kept pelting them with her most annoying high-level spells. Every time Ethan tried to close the distance, another barrage of arcane missiles or shimmering light bolts forced him back. The fight was only getting started, and the real challenge lay ahead. If you enjoyed the chapter, please bookmark and recommend it.